Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook. Marvel Comics. Crossing into Krynn, I am the master of technology. Chapter 81. After finally seeing off a few people, Killian turned his gaze to Rose, who was still looking at the place where Nick Fury disappeared not far away and couldn't forget it for a long time. What, are you still envious of other people's stealth planes? At this time, Killian walked up to the other party with a smile on his face, and said jokingly, "How can you not be envious? For a modern military, a true stealth fighter can be of great significance. It's just that even now, all our military aircraft can do is apply invisible paint to achieve pseudo-invisibility by avoiding radar scanning. If we can have an aircraft like his, it will be even more powerful for us. Whether it is a fighter jet or a transport aircraft, it can allow the enemy to drop a large amount of ammunition or personnel into the enemy's core without any precautions. Its strategic value is even greater than that of a tyrant. Although our military has never dealt with S.H.I.E.L.D., we have to say that they have gathered the funds of the World Security Council, and their scale is even larger than what we have seen, and their background is unimaginable. This technology alone will take us decades to research." After hearing Killian's words, Rose also said with emotion at this moment, "If the World Security Council was willing to allocate funds to S.H.I.E.L.D., they would probably have unlocked these technologies long ago. But these are just fantasies after all. Haha, isn't it amazing? If you want it, how about giving me $20 billion and I will help you develop stealth technology first?" Regarding Rose's words, Killian just smiled slightly, and then said nonchalantly, "Because of stealth technology, Killian is not very advanced in the development sequence at this stage, because this technology, to put it bluntly, is only suitable for military use and has a limited range of civilian applications. It is far less practical than Baymax, smartphones, T-virus medicine, etc. Therefore, Killian is not in a hurry when it comes to the development of invisible technology. Of course, if Rose is willing to spend money on him in advance, he doesn't mind bringing this option out in advance. After all, it's just an invisible technology. Among black technologies, it is already a bad technology. After all, which science fiction movie now doesn't use invisible technology? Not to mention invisible planes, invisible cars, invisible umbrellas, invisibility cloaks, etc. You can't think of anything that a screenwriter can't make up. Even in terms of technology alone, there is full-spectrum stealth, which means that long-distance infrared-guided weapons cannot identify and lock targets, and are invisible in the red ultraviolet band. As for the cannon, it is even more useless. It cannot be seen even at close range. Invisibility in the true sense of the word. It's just that it's impossible to exchange the last Killian for Ross. Let alone the price. This thing is what he plans to arm his own army in the future. According to Killian's estimation, S.H.I.E.L.D's stealth fighters are at most optically stealthy. Are you serious? After hearing what Killian said, Rose looked at him with a look of surprise. You must know that this is invisible technology. Apart from S.H.I.E.L.D., he has never heard of any organization that can develop this. But after thinking about it in the end, he was still in front of the CEO of Pioneer Technology, a guy who could even create robots and tyrants, so Ross wasn't so surprised. Of course, this price is affordable, and our company is already investing in preliminary research and development. It's just that I haven't increased the manpower investment, otherwise the progress will definitely exceed your expectations. How about it? As long as you invest $20 billion now, I guarantee that I will give you a fighter stealth technology like S.H.I.E.L.D. within 2 years. I guarantee you will make a profit with your blood." Looking at Rose's incredible expression, Killian continued to speak. After all, he found that selling these weapons technologies to the military would gain him much more influence than selling them himself. Just how long did it take for the tyrant to be handed over to the military? The military gave him tens of thousands of reputation points, even approaching 6 figures. He couldn't imagine what these guys were doing. Where has the tyrant gone? And if the stealth technology is given to them again, according to Killian's estimation, if the military people don't use the new technology to do things, then there will be trouble. As for a stealth technology, the most basic optical stealth system only requires 500 reputation points, and Killian can get hundreds of times in return. It is not impossible that it may even be as high as 1,000 or 10,000 times at most. In this way, Killian's negligible investment will be rewarded with huge returns. For Killian, it was a guaranteed profit, and the money spent was provided by the military. What is this called? Using other people's money to let others work for you, and after the work is done, others will say thank you to you. I need to go back and think about it. Looking at Killian's confident eyes, Ross still subconsciously chose to believe it, but after all, it was $20 billion, and their military's total military expenditure per year was only $300 billion. It would cost so much right now. Even if their army was already known as a money-burning machine, they had to consider whether it was worth it. Ha ha ha, no rush, but General Ross, I have something to say beforehand. If you don't bid, if it's too late, other organizations will come to you. Don't blame me for selling to them. Killian also expressed his understanding of Rose's words, but he still said what needed to be said. After all, the U.S. military is not the only organization in the world that can cause trouble. Wouldn't it be better if we support an organization in Afghanistan and use our own technology to cause trouble for ourselves? But for Killian, these are all things for the future. Unless necessary, he will not get involved in war. It is more in line with his development purpose to make a fortune secretly and make money while others work for their lives. Quote. After hearing Killian's words, Rose didn't know what to say for a moment. Although he knows that the arms companies in the United States are basically the same breed. While doing business for the U.S. military, they are also selling arms crazily to major military organizations around the world. But doing it is one thing, saying it is another. You know, he is still a general in the U.S. military. Just when Ross was about to leave, Killian's secretary came over. After reporting to Killian in a low voice, he walked out at Killian's signal. General Ross, I have good news for you. The bill we proposed to amend the federal code has just been passed and has come into effect. And this also means that our next experiment will also enter a new beginning. At this time, Killian looked at Rose in front of him happily, and then spoke with his puzzled eyes. So fast. After hearing Killian's words, Rose couldn't help but said in surprise. You must know that it has only been a month at most from the last time they confirmed their support for Killian to today's meeting. During this period, Killian also needed to coordinate interpersonal relationships between various departments and major companies. Although those constitutional amendments do not take long, their preparation time is definitely calculated in years. And this was actually done by Killian in less than a month. This is simply unbelievable. You must know that when he reported the news before, they once thought that the military would even need to come out to solve some troubles for their platform. We are even prepared for it. Is this the result? Those pharmaceutical companies that had not dealt with pioneer technology before did not take issue with this amendment, which surprised Ross. Although they may not necessarily have people in the Senate, shouldn't guiding public opinion be what these large companies are best at? Of course, I have the iron-blooded General Ross of the military and Senator Kennedy of the Senate standing up for me. How could they come out to provoke me again and just look down on me? After all, you are General Ross behind me. After hearing Rose's words, Killian said with a smile. Nowadays, 6 of the top 10 pharmaceutical companies are on his side. In the pharmaceutical field, with Dubai's help, he can be said to have complete control of 2/3 of the market. Even under Killian's instruction, several pharmaceutical companies are still expanding their businesses. It can be said that during the period of cooperation with Pioneer Technology, the 6 pharmaceutical companies have already used their full firepower. Now the only 4 remaining pharmaceutical companies have problems even continuing to survive, let alone standing up to cause trouble. Haha, Sir Killian, if you go into sales, I believe you will definitely be the sales champion. Rose smiled slightly at Killian's compliment. Then, can I then assume that your company can start human experiments? Then he changed the subject and said immediately. After all, after seeing the power of the biological tyrant, he was already looking forward to the tyrant developed from the human body. Of course, in fact, we have already made relevant preparations and everything is waiting for the finalization of the bill. General Ross, if you are free, why don't you come with us to watch the progress of the experiment? After seeing Rose's expectations for the tyrant, Killian also suggested on the spot. After all, his original plan was to come to the site tonight to witness the tyrant's human experiments, but now, he just brought an extra Ross. It just so happens that we can also let the other party witness the real tyrant. Yes, it is a tyrant in the true sense. In this month, although Samuel has not conducted human trials, but the biological tyrant is becoming more and more powerful. With the fusion of the T-virus and the extremis virus, even the isolation room made of several meters of concrete and steel originally prepared by Krynn was a bit unbearable. So far, a total of 10 scientific research teams have been responsible for developing organisms with different adaptabilities to the T-virus. And almost every creature, because the power of the T-virus is already great, and coupled with the violent energy blessing of the extremis virus, its out-of-control power is even greater. Even now, the Black Watch in the base has been increased by Krynn to 1,000 people. The scale has increased, but it still can't hold up and needs to put out fires everywhere. It can only be said that biological weapons are too uncontrollable and dangerous. Every time a biological tyrant goes berserk, the laboratory on that floor must be maintained in all aspects. It's just that at such a high cost, the rewards are extremely generous. The current team has made great progress in developing the tyrant's strength, intelligence, and speed. Even the future research direction of tyrants will be based on these three. Certainly. Then, with the consent of General Ross, Krynn took the other party, and after passing through layers of security, came to the 29th underground floor, which was the largest level open to the public. Along the way, with Krynn leading the way, Ross also saw what it means to be a top technology company. Along the way, whether it was its advanced security authentication methods, the several meter thick pure steel isolation gate, or the subordinates whose momentum and physical fitness were comparable to those of special forces, all of these have left Ross in his heart feeling secretly surprised. In fact, he has always known that Krynn has developed an underground base down here. But what he didn't expect was that the other party had developed as deep as the 29th floor underground. You must know that this is an underground laboratory, and based on the number of floors he is currently on, judging from such a height, it is at least several hundred meters deep. The current air raid shelters are only 60 meters deep at most, but Krynn's handiwork is so large, which really makes him admire. But on top of this, he was even more curious about what research Krynn's other 20 or so levels were responsible for. After all, he didn't believe that Krynn wouldn't put it into use immediately after wasting so much effort to build such a deep underground base. Boss, General, you are welcome to come and inspect. After passing through several isolation doors, followed by the final disinfection and cleaning, Ross finally arrived at an extremely spacious experimental observation room under the leadership of Krynn and Samuel, who had been prepared inside. He was wearing a white coat and spoke to the two of them with a smile on his face. My pleasure. In response, Krynn smiled and nodded, and General Ross on the side also spoke with the same smile. He was very patient and polite to these scientists. Has the experiment started now? At this time, after looking at a naked and sturdy man with a height of 1.9 meters who was inserted into a tube and floating in a cylindrical transparent culture chamber filled with nutrient solution, Krynn immediately asked. This cylindrical culture chamber is very similar in appearance to the culture chamber used by Krynn to cultivate clones. They are both cylindrical in shape and made of high-resistant tempered glass. If there is one difference, it is this. The size of the seed culture chamber is much larger than that of the clone, and it is also thicker. It's just that if you look closely at the man inside, you can see that there are dots of corpse spots forming on his body. If it weren't for the cultivation of nutrient solution, his whole body would rot away bit by bit. And that's not all. In this laboratory, there are 3 large breeding cabins from left to right, numbered 1, 2, 3, and 3 experimental subjects. Lying in the middle is number 1, a standard Western man with an extremely strong build. It is reported that he came out of the underground ring. Number 2 is a well-known criminal with a high IQ. The police even tried to arrest him dozens of times. In the end, he ran away to Florida. The governor also considered the issue of publicity and influence and asked Pioneer Technology for help. Finally, he was successfully captured with the help of Pioneer Technology. The last one is a woman with a slender figure and a charming look. She is also a vicious and terrifying existence who has killed dozens of people with her beauty. It can be said that every criminal here has dozens of lives in their hands. It would not be an exaggeration to shoot him on the spot, but at this moment, to the researchers in the laboratory, they are just experimental subjects. Yes, all preparations have been completed. Now we are starting to check the infusion pipeline and injecting the virus will start immediately. After hearing Killian's words, Samuel on the side also spoke respectfully. Then let's get started. General Ross, it will probably take a while. After nodding, Killian said silently, and after finishing speaking, he said to Rose beside him. Haha, if you can see such a great scene, what does it matter if you wait? Regarding Killian's words, Rose said indifferently. I remember that when he was on the battlefield, he could lie among the dead on the battlefield for several days in order to complete his mission, let alone now. After hearing Killian's words, Samuel immediately walked to the nearby laboratory and began to give instructions. For a time, with the operation of various instruments, all the instruments in the entire laboratory lit up. The vitality test index is normal. Energy detection is normal. The Tyrant experiment has officially begun. After the operating equipment of each researcher was normal, Samuel spoke solemnly. As if to show the importance of this experiment, behind the isolation door not far away, 10 heavily armed watcher teams have been assembled and on standby. If the experiment goes wrong, they will launch a fire strike as soon as possible. It's just that the researchers present had expected this, and the defensive measures were very sufficient. They were not surprised by this. After all, after so many experiments, the lineup is basically the same in every experiment, but this time it is a little bigger. Other than this, there is no difference from before. Then, along with one on the left and one on the right, one green and one orange, 2 very gorgeous medicines followed the flow of the transparent infusion tube and flowed into the body of the experimental subject in the culture chamber. Later, with the completion of the first drug injection, just when everyone was preparing to carefully observe the changes in the experimental subject. In an instant, I saw that the originally dead experimental subject in the training cabin seemed to have come to life. He suddenly opened his eyes again, looking at the person separated from him by a layer of glass with an extremely ferocious look. Everyone. At this moment, after seeing this scene, every researcher present felt a chill down their backs when they saw the other person's terrifying eyes, as if they were being stared at by an irrational beast. But soon, the pupils of the experimental subject began to change from the original blue to a strange blood red, and the original rotten body also accompanied the body, with orange light flashing continuously, and the original rotten body the place began to glow with life again. Very good. The physical signs of the experimental subjects are much more stable than those of the previous biological tyrant. It seems that we have great hope of success this time. After seeing this, Samuel couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief and said happily. Although for them, this is the first time they have done an experimental project developed by human tyrant, and everyone knows rationally that it is basically impossible to succeed in one go. After all, the most important thing about the experiment is to accumulate more experience and prepare for the future. Wrong road treads in the right direction. But now that both his boss and the generals from the military are present, Samuel is extremely hopeful that he can get it right at once. Doctor, the instrument shows that abnormalities are beginning to appear in the target's body. Follow it now. Yes, according to the reaction, the virus concentration in the target's body is too high. The T virus and the extremis virus cross-fused, causing great instability in his body. He began to mutate, and his weight continued to increase. Doctor, the body temperature of the experimental subject has also begun to rise, 24 degrees, 26 degrees, 30 degrees, 35 degrees. At this time, as the life display data in the middlemost experimental body was abnormal, an assistant couldn't help but hurriedly said the alarm data line by line. Continue testing. Laboratory department, draw the target blood immediately. I want a complete data report. Control department, waiting for my order, ready to freeze and cool down at any time. After hearing what the researcher on the side said, Samuel quickly walked to the main console. After seeing the data, he immediately spoke to various departments in the laboratory. At this time, he just observed the main control interface for a while. When he raised his head again and looked at the man in the training cabin, he suddenly discovered that the body of the experimental subject had suddenly grown in size, and its arms were there already bone spurs piercing the flesh and protruding out. His entire arm seemed to have been pricked with steel needles, and each bone spur was several centimeters long. And that's not all. As time goes by, in the eyes of everyone, the body of the experimental subject also begins to grow rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. The originally solid muscles also began to become more solid under the modification of the virus. It was as if tons of flesh and blood had been squeezed into a human-sized size. Moreover, its skin did not have the original corpse spots. Instead, the entire body turned gray-white like a zombie, and all the hair on the body also completely fell off at this moment. Even at the end, inside its body, everyone could see the green and orange light intertwining with each other in a visible way. However, on the console panel, Samuel could directly see that the energy value in the experimental subject in front of him began to rise rapidly. It was even more powerful than the energy index of some of the second-level terminal virus transformers he had consulted before, which was simply jaw-dropping. And then, with the blessing of energy, the man's bones began to grow thicker and longer. Boom, 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 single quote. Even if these are nothing, what really shocked everyone was that the experimental subject's heart actually started beating again. And this time, the sound of his heart beating could even be heard by everyone in this extremely large room. It was like a huge steel furnace. As the energy inside continued to increase, it began to roar like a drum. Even later, the sound began to force people to use earplugs to block it and keep themselves working normally. However, this change did not last long. It only lasted for an hour. As the bright light on the man's body dissipated, the original drum-like heartbeat also disappeared. And at this moment, everyone watched. At this moment, the experimental subject in the training cabin could only barely tell from the number given to it at the beginning that the other party was once a death row prisoner. He can now be described by it. Now, his height has exceeded 4 meters, reaching 4.5 meters. The original enlarged training cabin, under the tyrant's body at this time, appears extraordinarily small. Even Ross, who was in the observation room, had no doubt that if the cultivation cabin was made larger, it might be as high as 7 or 8 meters. Moreover, the muscles all over his body are so tight that even if you just look at it from a distance, you can imagine the huge power. Even if an ordinary person touches it lightly, it may be smashed to pieces. It's just that compared to the previous biological tyrant, the current tyrant is a real super soldier in Ross's eyes. Except for his height, he looked exactly like a human being, with gray skin all over his body and not a single unnecessary scar on his body. Unlike the previous biological tyrant, his whole body was covered with hideous wounds like centipedes. As we looked around, the other two tyrants on the side looked much more normal. After being transformed by the virus, the man on the far left who originally looked gentle and gentle only grew to 2.6 meters tall. The appearance of Chi is as high as the waist of the tyrant in the middle. It's just that the brain waves of his brain seem to be particularly developed, even to the point of being alerted by researchers. The female tyrant on the far side has almost no change at all. Her height has increased from 1.7 meters to 2 meters. Compared with other tyrants, this change is almost negligible. But the strange thing is that her hair is still healthy, and her limbs are not as thick as a human head like that of experimental subject No. 1 tyrant. Its limbs are extraordinarily slender, which perfectly amplifies the female characteristics. Moreover, its bright black nails shimmered with cold light, and from the naked eye alone, Ross was sure that their hardness was no less than that of the previous biological tyrant. Doctor, the target's vital signs and energy response have all stabilized. Doctor, the target blood test shows that the fusion status of its cells with T-virus and terminal virus has reached 50%. After testing, a large number of cells have entered a dormant state, and the condition is very good. Doctor, the fusion reactions of the other two experimental subjects are normal, and all indicators are normal. It's just that the brain wave fluctuations of experiment number 2 are too large. At this time, after professional testing, researchers began to report the compiled data to Samuel. Your Excellency Killian, I can only say that you are worthy of being the one. I didn't expect that the first test would be so perfect. Pioneer technology is really extraordinary. I can't wait to see their performance on the battlefield in the future. At this time, Rose, who was in the observation room, couldn't help but grin and said to Killian after hearing the word, normal, reported by the researchers one by one. The previous biological tyrants could already eradicate those terrorist organizations. If these experimental humanoid tyrants were put into the battlefield, at this moment, Ross could not imagine how the army he led would lose. You know, for the current U.S. military, the weakest point is infantry combat. Because their population is small, each excellent soldier requires an extremely expensive price to train. Even sometimes, they would rather spend a lot of money on artillery strikes than let good soldiers die. It is also because of this. For them, artillery fire coverage is the least valuable thing. The most indispensable thing for the military is artillery fire, and the most powerful thing is artillery fire. As long as they open up and compete in firepower, they will not be afraid of any organization. Even if you go too far, it is not impossible to give you a non-stop artillery bombardment by thousands of aircrafts composed of several fleets. But if it is an infantry battle, it will be their nightmare, especially in the first few battlefields. Therefore, it is precisely because of this that they continue to invest money in the development of super soldiers. And now, this problem that has troubled them for many years is finally going to be solved. Ha ha ha, I still benefit from these talents. Dr. Samuel is truly extraordinary. But since General Ross is so impatient, how about letting me see its specific practicality next? After hearing Rose's words, Killian also laughed and shied away, and then changed the topic again. Oh, if that's the case, I'll have to wait even if it means laying a floor in your place. Killian's proposal undoubtedly touched Rose's heart, and he immediately accepted it without any hesitation. You will not be disappointed. Dr. Samuel, if everything is normal, let's start the next operation immediately. After talking to Rose, Killian spoke to Samuel in the laboratory through the microphone in front of him. At this time, after hearing Killian's words, Samuel in the laboratory nodded immediately, and then began to give instructions to the assistants around him. Immediately, the assistant on the side also began to control the equipment on the console. After reducing the dose of the sedative that was being continuously injected, he injected neutralizing drugs into the experimental subject to ensure that the experimental subject remained in the state. The first moment you wake up, you won't want to go out in a rage and kill them. After completing this, the isolation button on the console was pressed, and for a moment, huge reinforced glass doors began to fall from above the head. After a while, the originally relatively empty laboratory was divided into 3 levels inside and 3 outside. After completing all the preparations, everyone breathed a sigh of relief and stood patiently looking at the experimental subjects inside through the glass, silently waiting for the 3 experimental subjects inside to wake up. And after about 10 minutes, accompanied by deep roars, the experimental subject in the middle with the strongest physique was the first to wake up. After his fingers began to tremble slightly and began to move, he then began to slowly open his blood vessels, red eyes. But the only thing that was a bit reassuring was that there was no violent look in the opponent's waking eyes as everyone expected. At this moment, experimental subject number 1 seems to have just woken up and been deprived of human memories. At this time, his blood-red pupils were filled with great confusion, as if he didn't know why there were all dwarfs in front of him looking at him. But just when he wanted to continue reading, the memory of the dead suddenly began to appear in his mind, and he subconsciously wanted to hold down his painful head. But when he raised his hand, he was obviously stunned, because at this moment, his right hand had turned into a huge arm full of bone spurs and sharp claws. After sensing that something was wrong with him, experimental subject number 1 roared in a low voice, as if he didn't understand the abnormality in himself. Then he slowly turned his head and suddenly found that his body was covered with various infusion tubes. Roar! After feeling these dense threads wrapped around his body, experimental subject number 1 subconsciously let out a threatening roar, and then began to struggle. For a while, the experimental subject continued to shake, accompanied by bang, bang, bang. There was a snapping sound, and all the infusion tubes inserted into his body were disconnected. Immediately after discovering that he had broken free of those threads, experimental subject number 1 used vague language, looked up to the sky and laughed, expressing his happiness. Experimental subject number 1 seems to have maintained the basic thinking habits of the human period. According to preliminary observations, although the experimental subject has lost its memory as a human being, its brain is still very active, retaining simple intelligence, and is comparable to biological tyrants and pure zombie-like creatures. There is a clear difference. suspected to have the learning ability of a 5 to 8-year-old child. After watching the performance of experimental subject number 1, the recorder on the side immediately picked up the file in his hand and began to record in a low voice. Try communicating and see if you can communicate. At this time, Samuel, after looking at it for a while, spoke to the assistant beside him. Thompson. The assistant on the side nodded, then controlled the microphone on the side and spoke into the microphone. Quote exclamation mark quote. Experimental subject number 1, who was still looking around with a confused expression, suddenly froze when he heard the familiar but unfamiliar name, and then raised his head to look at the place with the sound above his head. Doctor, it looks like we can still communicate. Do you want to continue? After seeing the reaction of the experimental subject, the assistant on the side couldn't help but feel excited, and then asked the doctor. Continue. After giving the order coldly, the assistant then said, "You." It's just that when he just opened his mouth and didn't say the second word. Then I saw experimental subject number 1 in the isolation room. He took a step and jumped towards the speaker on the ceiling. Then there was only a bang sound, and the place where the speaker was originally installed was accompanied by the experimenter. A small explosion was released. But this time, everyone present felt the obvious trembling in the room. However, although there was a lot of movement, thankfully, in the underground research room, almost every floor and every design was made of super strong materials, so except for the exposed speakers, there was no other damage. Even because of excessive force, it was obvious that subject number 1 was a little dazed by the blow he just made after landing again. Doctor, it seems he doesn't want to communicate with us. After seeing this, the assistant on the side also spoke immediately. No, keep going. But this time, in response to the assistant's words, Samuel smiled mysteriously and then spoke. Hello, can you hear me? Although he didn't understand why the doctor was doing useless work, the assistant was very obedient and continued to control the microphone. But this time, to everyone's surprise, the backup speakers in other places began to ring, and the original experimental subject number 1 instinctively felt angry and wanted to blow it up. But after seeing that it was exactly the same thing as the one he had just punched, he couldn't help but tilt his head and hesitated. The clenched fists, which were as big as sandbags, were also loosened. It was as if he was curious about why the thing he had just blown up suddenly appeared intact somewhere else. It's just that although his little head is full of doubts, the powerful rebound just now is still engraved in his body. And this also prevented him from making any more moves. PhD. When everyone outside saw this scene, they were extremely excited. You must know that this is the first experimental subject who did not become furious after hearing their voices. This proves that the other party can think and has a certain IQ. And with this, it means that he can be cultivated as a controllable biological weapon. Go on, throw a knife down and see what he does. At this moment, Samuel, who was in charge of the experiment, was naturally extremely excited, but he still suppressed his excitement and continued to speak calmly. He knew this was just the beginning. After hearing the doctor's order, the assistant on the side nodded excitedly, and then with the operation of the main console, a hole suddenly opened above the number 1 experimental body, and then he saw the subject just looked up, and before he could react, a 2-meter-long machete fell straight down. All the way down to the feet of the experimental subject. The sudden movement could not help but frighten the experimental subject, and then he showed his fierce look and began to go crazy. Then he looked around vigilantly, waiting to tear into pieces the enemy that caused the noise. Just as a few minutes passed, there was still no reaction after seeing it. The experimental subject also retracted his fierce look, and then looked at the machete on the ground in front of him with a puzzled expression. He didn't understand why this thing appeared in front of him. Go teach him. After seeing this, Samuel on the side said to his assistant. He knew that the current tyrant only had the ability to learn and no other memories at all, so it could only be manifested by being taught. Under Samuel's order, the assistant on the side also began to cautiously walk to the glass cover in front of the experimental subject. Then, with careful guidance, he began to try to use his body language to teach the church tyrant by words and deeds. Immediately after the initial discomfort, tyrant number 1 found that the other party's actions seemed interesting, and he followed suit. Then he immediately bent down, and under the look of relief on his assistant's face, he firmly held the blade with his hand. PFF'd. Single quote. As the palm of the hand was cut by the blade, the blood of the experimental subject began to trickle out. The originally sharp steel knife was dyed red in an instant. However, due to the decrease in pain, he did not feel much pain, just like a normal person holding a ruler. Then he looked complacent and stared at the assistant in front of him, showing his cleverness. It's just that he doesn't know why. He always feels that the other person's eyes are a bit dull when looking at him. Maybe he is jealous of his genius. For a moment, the experimental subject thought of the adjectives that suddenly appeared in his mind. As experimental subject number 1 progressed smoothly, the experimental subjects in the other 2 cultivation cabins also began to slowly wake up. But the biggest difference from experimental subject number 1 is that those 2 didn't make much movement. Even experimental subject number 2 even has a lot of blue parts in the pupils, while red only occupies a small half. This discovery also made many people present feel excited. You must know that through experimental observation, the color change of the pupils can also show the IQ of the experimental subject to a great extent. After all, the brain center is behind the eyes. The more the brain is eroded by infection, the more it will affect the color of the pupils. For example, the pupils of number 1, which are almost entirely scarlet, mean that the IQ is low. There is even a hint of spirituality in number 2's eyes. The eyes that are constantly twisting and observing the surroundings are always shining with the light of wisdom. If the IQs of these experimental subjects are compared to dogs, then experimental subject number 1 is a husky, then experimental subject number 2 definitely belongs to the level of border collie. Throw another knife at him. After seeing the wisdom and curiosity in the other person's eyes, Samuel, who was standing in the laboratory, also spoke immediately. Snapped. Single quote. Then, as the assistant pressed the button, a gap opened above experimental subject number 2, and then a steel knife fell straight down. However, unlike No. 1, experimental subject number 2 retreated to a position against the wall after first discovering the accident. Then, after the steel knife fell and the gap on it closed again, it reopened. He moved his gaze from the gap in the ceiling to the ground. At this time, he didn't even wait for the assistant to get up and teach the other party's movements. Experimental subject number 2 glanced at experimental subject number 1, who was holding a steel knife and waving it excitedly, and then bent down, then grasped the handle of the knife and picked it up. He tried waving it twice in the air and quickly figured out the purpose of this thing. After seeing this scene, everyone in the observation room couldn't help but feel excited. You must know that after being eroded by the T-virus, basically all living creatures will have a severe decline in their IQ, and the other party's current performance is simply like a junior high school student. It's just that compared to the progress of experimental subject number 2, which is going smoothly, the female experimental subject number 3 is causing everyone a headache. After he just woke up and got rid of the tubes on his body, he turned his back to everyone, squatted down in the corner, and then hugged his body and cried, "Woo, stand up." This cry seemed particularly desolate and sad. In this room that was not very noisy, it kept echoing and could not stop for a long time. With that look, some researchers even seriously doubted that the other person still retained his sanity during his lifetime, so they started crying after seeing his current appearance. However, to Samuel now, this kind of crying, far from being miserable, seemed particularly weird. After all, if the other party really recovers their previous memories, then a normal person's first thought would naturally be to communicate with them, or even if it doesn't work, they would want to break the current prison and escape. But the other party did nothing, just cried there. Does this guy actually have human emotions? At this moment, Samuel was thinking in his mind. You must know that the average T-virus transformer is either furious and wants to destroy everything in front of him, or he wants to eat everything. These are all based on the most basic instincts in the body. Sad emotions such as crying are mostly emotions of intelligent creatures. Perhaps experimental subject number 3 will give him a far greater shock than experimental subject number 1 and number 2, but it is not certain. Open the isolation blockade on number 1 and No. 3. After thinking for a while, Samuel said to the assistant on the side. Receive. After replying, the assistant pressed the button to release the isolation. Then he only saw the multi-layered protective door between number 1 and number 2, which began to rise slowly. At this moment, the shrill cries belonging to subject number 3 began to reach the ears of subject number 1 in a more intuitive way. After noticing a louder and miserable cry suddenly coming from the side, subject number 1 looked back and saw a short winter melon crouching in the corner with his back to him, sobbing constantly on his shoulders. Coupled with that hot figure, even if one takes a look at it, one can't help but come forward to comfort her. It's just that these things seem extremely irritable to experimental subject number 1 at this moment. Originally, he was happy to have a happy toy. As a result, before I could have fun for a while, there was a short winter melon crying and making a lot of noise, which was very annoying. Then, after seeing the figure, experimental subject number 1 walked over with his huge body. He wanted the short winter melon in front of him to know what it meant to have a fist as big as a sandbag. Roar. After experimental subject number 1 walked into the isolation cabin of number 3, number 3, who had keen hearing, immediately let out a huge roar after hearing that it had entered his attack range. I saw the opponent's flexible neck twisted 180 degrees, with a furious expression, and a pair of scarlet eyes looking at the oncoming experimental subject no. 1. Then the whole person stood up in an instant, using the sharp claws that were several centimeters long. He suddenly jumped onto the body of experiment number 1, and then after letting out a huge roar, he started throwing sand crazily. Generally, grab it on experimental subject no. 1. In an instant, flesh and blood flew everywhere in the isolation room, and the angry roar belonging to experimental subject number 1 also immediately sounded. In the eyes of everyone, as experimental subject number 3 used his sharp claws to tear open the chest of experimental subject number 1 several times, he was then grabbed tightly by the angry number 1 with his huge arms. Then he squeezed it with his hand, and with a huge trembling sound, it fell straight to the ground. He didn't even care if the toy in his hand fell, but he raised his huge foot to step on it. However, after breaking away from the restraints, experimental subject number 3, who had just landed on the ground, raised his head, and everyone's eyes were blurred. The opponent flashed and appeared on the chest of experimental subject number 1 again, facing towards the position of the heart is beating wildly. It's like a girl who was abandoned by a scumbag wants to see clearly what color the other person's heart is after turning black. And in the following time, the two kept pulling back and forth. Experimental subject number 1 relies on his super defense and body recovery speed, and experimental subject number 3 is often grabbed by the big hand of number 1 before being thrown halfway from the heart, and then thrown out. Experimental subject number 3 relies on her superb agility. As long as the opponent does not hold her tightly and prevents her from moving, she can break away at any time, and then crawl to the chest of experimental subject no. 1. Make a big hole in it. This farce lasted for more than half an hour. At the end, even experimental subject number 2 not far away was tired of watching. He turned his head and began to cast his eyes on those who were watching with interest. Researchers fighting between two test subjects. But as his eyes kept turning, his eyes finally rested on the upright man in a suit next to the man in military uniform. The other party also looked at him with interest. He didn't even know why, but the word, observation, came to his mind. It's just that he doesn't understand the meaning of this word yet. But his instinct told him to choose to avoid the other party's eyes. At this moment, Krynn was the one who had just made eye contact with experimental subject no. 2. Compared to the extraordinary performance of experimental subject number 1 and 3 in terms of physical strength and agility, Krynn discovered that the intellectual performance of experimental subject number 2 was even higher than they imagined. Krynn couldn't help but become interested for a moment, but he just chose to continue observing. The main character now is Samuel, who respects the other's experiments. Samuel also lived up to Krynn's trust and immediately discovered the anomaly of experimental subject no. 2. But at this moment, experimental subject number 1 and number 3 were fighting too brutally. Even the aftermath caused the documents on their desks to scatter all over the floor. Finally, I had to hold something heavy to hold it down, and it felt a little better. In the isolation room on the other side, the ground was even cracked. If the two experimental subjects fighting were ignored, the current ground would even make some cult members think it was the appearance ceremony of the evil god. Okay, that's almost it. Let them calm down. After seeing this scene, Samuel spoke to the assistant on the side. After hearing Samuel's words, the assistant nodded, and immediately pressed the red button on the console. Then he saw rows of brand new machine gun barrels popping up on the roof of the isolation cabin. Come out. Then, before the two experimental subjects could react, the next second, all the gun barrels began to glow with blazing flames. The entire scene was like a dragon's head breathing out dragon's breath. Flame tongues continued to emerge from each barrel. Countless bullets, it swept down towards the experimental subject like a rain of bullets. Bang bang bang. Single quote. For a moment, the huge roar of the experimental subject was covered by the roaring gunfire in the room, and countless blood began to splash everywhere in a more terrifying way. Smoke from artillery fire immediately filled the entire isolation cabin. Accompanied by loud knocking sounds, the exposed experiment number 1 kept hitting the wall, or jumping up to smash the metal iron pipe, but all in vain. Because each barrel is equipped with super-strength anti-impact material on the outside, and even if it is smashed, it will only be accompanied by the mechanical falling off. After the original machine gun falls, it will reappear in its original place the next second got a new machine gun. Just like that, after 10 minutes of indiscriminate bombardment, as the assistant pressed the button again, the sound of gunfire in the isolation cabin stopped. But this time, everyone looked at the smoke-filled isolation cabin with some anxiety. This is also part of the experiment. The purpose is to test the tyrant's ability to withstand strikes and see how far he can go. Although Tyrant has always been a monster that specializes in strength, if you know Resident Evil, you will know that the most powerful ability of biological weapons like Tyrant is not its powerful power, but its terrifying regeneration ability, and a body that can crush RPGs with bare hands. This time, the machine guns they prepared all used enlarged barrels, and the bullets were also of 12.7 mm caliber. Even one bullet like this would be a nightmare for most creatures, guaranteeing that they would be unable to take care of themselves. But now, facing the full power strafing fire from dozens or hundreds of 12.7 mm machine guns, even the previous biological tyrant may not be able to withstand it. Now, as to whether experimental subjects number 1 and 3 can withstand this level of attack, everyone here has a big question in their minds. Immediately, as the ventilation system in the isolation cabin was opened, a large amount of gunpowder smoke began to be discharged by the ventilation system. After a while, as the thick fog dispersed, everyone began to clearly see the situation in the isolation cabin. I saw that the originally strong and tight body of experimental subject number 1 had exposed a large number of deep white bones at this moment, and even the white bones and bone spurs on the arms were exposed because the flesh and blood were shattered by the collision of the bullets. Everyone could even clearly see that in the damaged area of the opponent's chest, the innermost heart began to glow with a faint orange light, accelerating the body's healing. The eyes of experimental subject number 1 were filled with extreme anger at this moment, but compared to before, his body was constantly fluctuating with his breathing. Although as an experimental subject of the Tyrant project, its regeneration ability is as powerful as the Tyrant, but since it is named regeneration, it means that it has strong metabolism and cell division capabilities. And no matter how powerful the ability is, since it is a living thing, it means that it must follow the principle of energy conservation. The faster the metabolism and the faster the cells divide, the more energy is needed to compensate for itself. To put it simply, when the experimental subject is constantly repairing the cells in the body due to a shock to the body, it needs a large amount of energy to supply the body cells to drive the dividing cells to repair the body. Otherwise, it will be because there is no energy, causing the recovery speed of the wound to slow down, or directly losing the ability to recover. But now, because it has just experienced the comprehensive evolution of the body, the cells of the body are still in a sluggish and sleeping state, and the energy supply is insufficient. In addition, there is not enough energy, that is, flesh and blood for them to devour and replenish, so this has led to the fact that the current experimental subject number 1 still has bursts of exposed spiked white bones on the outside, without flesh and blood covering them. The other party also did not retaliate against everyone immediately because of his weak body energy. To put it simply, the current experimental subject number 1 is so hungry that he is about to faint. Experimental subject number 3 on the side was equally miserable. Although the huge body of experimental subject number 1 helped it bear most of the bullets, she also suffered a lot of bullets because it was shot from all directions. The entire body is now lying on the ground, dying. There is no longer the madness he had when he fought with experimental subject No. 1. However, after sensing that there was no previous attack, both experimental subjects began to silently eat the unknown piece of meat on the floor. As the two continued to eat, everyone began to show horrified looks. From the weak state at the beginning, the two experimental subjects were slowly forced out of the body as their wounds began to heal, and the crisp sound of ding 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 falling to the ground could not be heard. In less than a minute, as experimental subject number 1 slowly stood up, when he stood up completely again, he saw that his body, which was originally full of wounds, was now full of wounds. It had been completely healed, leaving only dense bullets and blood stains on the ground to prove that an extremely tragic scene had just happened here. And experimental subject number 3 also stood up not long after number 1 stood up. But at this moment, the two experimental subjects just looked at each other and no longer had the previous urge to fight. The blow just now had penetrated deeply into their souls. This is the characteristic of an intelligent creature, that is, as long as you leave a lasting impression on it, it will remember you and fear you until it is finally completely tamed and becomes a real biological weapon. Although it will lose its terrifying wild ability to a large extent, even so, as long as it maintains its normal strength and its existing wisdom, it is enough for humans to do many things. After that, Samuel began to conduct individual ability tests based on 3 different experimental subjects. The test results are obvious and live up to everyone's expectations and are extremely perfect. Even experimental subject number 2 can skillfully use various cold weapons and even crossbows after only a short period of instruction. Moreover, experimental subject number 2 is not as crazy as number 1 and number 3, and wants to tear people apart when they see them. Experimental subject number 2 gave everyone the feeling that a gentle researcher suddenly appeared among the monkeys. It was keen on learning and thinking. Even for some simple questions, after learning, you will feel obvious satisfaction. And it was precisely because of this that the researchers present were excited. But the only pity is that there were sudden riots on the battlefields in other areas, and the tyrant under Ross, as a dazzling special forces unit, was spotted by the big guys, and they decided to take the tyrant over there overnight to deal with some problems. A more difficult question. And because of this, before Killian even exchanged a few greetings, he left here under the guidance of his guards and someone special in the base. Can you try to pick up this pen and write like me? As for Rose's departure, Killian didn't care. For him, experimental subject number 2 was more interesting. At this time, Killian suddenly became interested and walked to the isolation cabin of experimental subject No. 2. In front of him, through glass, 3D projection technology was used to vividly demonstrate how a person holds a pen with his hand and then writes and draws on paper. After watching Killian's actions, experimental subject number 2 immediately looked at the paper and pen placed in front of him with a thoughtful look on his face. Then after thinking for a long time, he looked at the pen and paper in front of him, and a scene that shocked everyone present appeared. I saw that the paper and pen that were originally lying on the ground began to float in the air in a way visible to the naked eye, and then everyone was surprised. Then I saw the pen starting to write on the prepared draft paper. Although the handwriting was crooked and even unsightly, you must know that the other party may have the legendary telekinesis power. Is this telekinesis? Superpower? No way. For a moment, after seeing the ability of experimental subject number 2, all the researchers present couldn't help but whisper. You must know that this is a superpower. For ordinary people, if immortality is the pursuit of many people, then superpower is definitely what everyone dreams of. After all, superpowers mean infinite possibilities. But compared to them, as the protagonist Killian, his pupils couldn't help but shrink when he saw this scene. As Killian, who has watched the Resident Evil series, he clearly knows how difficult it is to awaken superpowers. Throughout Resident Evil, after it was determined that only Alice could perfectly adapt to the transformation of the T-virus, tens of millions of clones were used for experiments, and only then did Alice awaken a replica with telekinesis. It can be said that in Resident Evil, other people who change their personalities and appearance after being injected with the T-virus can only be regarded as mutants. Only Alice can be regarded as evolution in the true sense. Possessing human genes, she also has super strong physical fitness and telekinesis. Even in Resident Evil 3, the doctor in it clearly said that Alice's telekinesis is growing exponentially every day. As long as Alice is given enough time, let alone the Earth to space second satellite, even like Professor X, it will probably not be a problem to control all mankind. The only problem is that the probability is so small that if people all over the world are brought together to be injected with the T-virus, there may not be even one person who will wake up. He didn't expect that this world would give him such a big surprise. He had just started the human experiment, and he had already encountered an experimental subject who had awakened telekinesis. One thing to know is that as long as there is a target for a finished product, it is much easier for scientists to reverse the process than to develop it from scratch. Boss. At this time, Samuel was just like Krynn. He felt extremely enthusiastic when he looked at the number 2 experimental subject in front of him. However, with Krynn here, he still controlled his emotions very well. After standing next to Krynn, he spoke and waited for his next instructions. Immediately make it a key research object and figure out why its DNA sequence is so special. From now on, its telekinesis will be your main development direction, you know. I want you to be able to perfectly copy this superpower. After hearing Samuel come to the side, Krynn spoke to him. He had never thought about telekinesis at first, but now that he had encountered it, how could he not try it? Understood, boss, just wait for the good news. After hearing Kynn's words, Samuel at this moment also showed an excited smile and replied. For him, studying these extraordinary creatures is the greatest pleasure. Well, by the way, those things you just collected may contain valuable things. Please arrange for someone to take a good look at them. Oh, by the way, remember to send another part to General Ross. After all, he is our ally. Krynn also saw Samuel's excitement and ignored him. Instead, he pointed at the several bags of fresh blood stored in a cryogenic safe not far away, as well as the hair on various parts of the body, and gave instructions. Road. Of course, no problem, boss. After hearing Kynn's words, Samuel also responded with a smile. To be honest, if the special case of experimental subject number 2 hadn't been here, he would have really wanted to see for himself what was so strange about that agent's body that it was so special. After all, he had never seen anyone else possess that kind of reflexes and close combat with liquors, except for the extremely special security department of his company. And, I don't know why, but he always felt that maybe the female agent could fight several with her physical fitness. But he didn't say this. After all, he was the boss's most trusted subordinate. Although he is in a high position now, there is no need to ask for trouble and go against the department responsible for his own security. After the explanation, Krynn no longer had any thoughts of taking care of this. Then he left here directly. After this shield incident, he found that he had been a little slack recently. They only focus on investing in the development of black technology for civilian use, and invest too little in black technology to enhance their own strength. This led to the discovery when Natasha invaded the second underground floor. For a moment, after returning to the office, Krynn calmed down and began to look at his system. Zudian High Technology System. Host, Alderez Krynn. Reputation, 105,336. Technology Mall. Level 3, 106,336 1/1,000,000. Technology unlocking progress, none. Unlocked technologies. Baymax Junior Model T-Virus, Guard Blackwatch Junior Model Brain Control Chip. Now as the company continues to grow and develop, Krynn has unlocked more and more technologies. Looking at the dazzling array of tens of millions of various technologies in the system technology, even Krynn couldn't help but be dazzled for a while. But after several hours of picking, Krynn finally found a few familiar weapons. The first one is the blaster in Star Wars. The power can be adjusted freely. It can be adjusted to the minimum and used as a taser, and it can be adjusted to the maximum to shoot a child. And the most important thing is that its technology is universal. Basically, as long as the blaster technology is unlocked, Krynn is sure that it can be enlarged to tanks and spaceships in as little as 1 year or as long as 3 years. Because throughout Star Wars, almost all models of blasters use energy charging supply and energy compressed in the magazine. And this means that its practicality will be greatly increased. What Krynn chose was the F-11D, an automatic bursting blaster rifle. Among its features are the variable magnification sight with auxiliary electronic equipment and the expansion interface that can be modified by oneself to determine the increase in power and range. This is also the reason why Killian chose this. And then there is the self-destructing Firefly bomb in Spec Ops 2. This type of bomb is not only easy to carry, but is plentiful and can be extremely concealed before it explodes. Even each bomb is equipped with a chip. It has the most basic input time, delay, and timed detonation. It can even realize the principle of explosion through reverse triggering, that is, it will automatically explode when no signal is received, which can achieve long-distance lossless explosion. In the original film, there was a close-up of the Firefly suddenly dimming, which meant that the signal was interrupted and the signal could not be received, so it exploded on the spot. And no matter what kind of explosion method it is, the power and applicable scenarios of Firefly bombs are also extremely impressive. So Killian chose it. After that, with both rifles and bombs available, Killian focused mainly on the pistol. It's just that it took him a long time to make it small and portable without losing power. Only in the end did we find the two most novel technological weapons. The other is the Mk6 smart pistol used exclusively by Pilot for escape in Titanfall 2. The biggest highlight of the former is that you can choose whether you are a cold-blooded killer or a dog lover, that is, you can choose whether to automatically lock your head or lock your knees. And based on preliminary understanding, you can still adjust it yourself. There is no game that can only kill 50 people, and then it will be forced to switch to a knee lock mode. But the biggest shortcoming of this pistol is that it is produced in the world of cyberpunk, and in that world almost everyone will have prosthetics implanted, so this also leads to the intelligent aiming device of Sijabao smart pistol. It needs to be connected to a smart prosthetic body to use it. And this means that if Killian wants to redeem this gun, he must copy all of cyberpunk's prosthetic transformation and installation and manufacturing technology. As for these cyberpunk technologies, Killian took a rough look at them. If he wanted to get the complete set, he wouldn't need to think about the reputation value of 80,000 to 90,000. Not to mention that although the world today is open, it is still far from the cyberpunk worldview where others can freely modify and replace their bodies. Spending 80,000 to 90,000 reputation points to exchange for something like this is totally not worth it. So Killian turned his attention to the latter. The Mk6 smart semi-automatic pistol produced by Lastimosa Ordnance. The ammunition capacity is 12 rounds, and the ammunition limit is 24 rounds. The technology contained in it includes a reciprocating charging handle, a frame-integrated ammunition counter, a multifunctional laser aiming module, and improved ergonomic design. The power of this pistol is extremely terrifying and powerful in the hearts of almost every Pilot player. One of its bullets is said to cost millions of dollars, and Captain Lastimosa finally saved up bullets that he was not willing to use for most of his life, but in the end they were all shot by Cooper. But now after seeing the information, Killian finally understood its specific value. Because when shooting, not only does the helmet itself have to calculate and fine-tune the trajectory, but even the bullets are specially made. It can be said that there is a microcomputer inside each bullet to adjust the trajectory. Ensure that intelligent tracking of targets can be achieved to achieve shooting hits. In fact, it's not bad, just one bullet is the same as shooting a missile, and if you look more carefully, some higher-end missiles cost hundreds of millions each. So in comparison, it's not too outrageous. After getting the weapons, Killian set his sights on the armor. After all, although his men were all clone soldiers and biological weapons, he was not afraid of losses. But the equipment of armor is also a big factor in improving combat effectiveness. Killian also directly targeted the nanosuits in Crisis. As for the other ones, they were either not cost-effective or too big to be suitable for individual combat. In fact, the machine gun armor in StarCraft was also under Killian's consideration, but unfortunately it was designed for the cruel space environment and was mainly used to deal with space combat. On the ground, it seems a bit useless. And the Thor armor that Killian thought he could see did not appear, otherwise Killian would have redeemed it as soon as possible. But for Killian, the nano armor is enough. You must know that the nano armor in Crisis almost perfectly integrates all battlefield needs into one. It can be regarded as the crystallization of nanotechnology achievements, representing the cutting-edge technology of nanotechnology and biotechnology applications in the world of Crisis. As a set of biological armor designed for combat, This set of armor has performed extremely well in many battles and can give the user superhuman combat capabilities. It can be said that even if you are an ordinary person, after wearing it, you can become a being that surpasses Captain America. Its own nano-central power supply and nanoparticles can be regarded as real black technology. So after confirming these choices, Killian waved his hand, and all the information began to emerge in Killian's mind along with the data transmission. More than half an hour later, Killian finally recovered. Looking at his remaining 4-digit reputation points, he was speechless for a moment. Although as the system is unlocked, he can choose more and more technologies, but according to the current situation, for each level unlocked, the reputation required for redemption of new technologies increases tenfold. And in addition to its own technological blueprint, each one also needs to unlock some necessary design drawings. After all, you can't just redeem the smart pistol without redeeming the bullet drawings. After redeeming the bullet drawings, you can't redeem the production line drawing. The same combination matched the same, emptying Killian's body almost instantly. But overall it's good value for money. What surprised Killian was that his brain seemed to be constantly being developed with every data transmission from the system to him. The most intuitive expression is that it used to take Killian at least a few days to memorize a book, but now, what he really has is a photographic memory. Killian even suspected that if this continued, when the system reached level 9, he might be able to become a telepath. But these are just Killian's own speculations. In the next few days, Killian mainly made these technologies into electronic drawings, and then handed them over to Dr. Otto and several veteran subordinates, who were responsible for corresponding projects. What Killian handed over to Dr. Alto was the nano armor. Because the manufacturing of this armor requires the development and expansion of various technologies, several of his veteran researchers, Killian, also know them. It's okay to do small and medium-sized projects or follow the script, but it's a bit stretched to do such a large project that can independently expand the research direction. Of course, it doesn't mean that they are not capable. The main thing is that it may only take 1 year to leave this project to Dr. Otto, but if it is left to them, it will take 3 to 5 years to complete. It can only be said that the gap between people is indeed huge, and this is why Killian did not hesitate to spend a lot of money to invite Dr. Otto. And Dr. Otto lived up to Killian's high expectations. When he first received these projects, he even regarded Killian as a living Einstein. You must know that the technologies Killian has given him so far are basically the same, and they are all technologies that are decades beyond the current level of technology. And now, ultra-advanced technology such as nanotechnology battle armor has arrived at once. For a time, Dr. Otto felt more and more that he was following the right person. Then he excitedly returned to his laboratory with the electronic drawings in hand and started researching. And a week later, Miami night. Chapter 91. Boss, no, it's an emergency. The T-0 pharmaceutical transport truck you asked us to transport to Congressman Kennedy was robbed. According to the investigation, those who robbed were members of the Skeleton Gang in Miami, an outside gang that has caused a lot of noise in Miami recently. However, because they are armed and the noise is within the tolerance range, the police have not leave them alone. Killian, who was originally watching the progress of various projects in the office, suddenly heard a rapid knock on the door. Then with Killian's permission, Killian only saw the secretary push the door in, and then she spoke to him with an anxious look on her face. Haha, it's interesting. The Skeleton Gang, I want to see if they are real skeletons. What did the police say? After hearing the secretary's words and knowing that his T-0 potion had been robbed, Killian couldn't help but laugh angrily. Perhaps he was wondering if he was too low-key, allowing these gangsters to dare to put the idea of making a fortune on his head. After the police learned the news, they contacted us as soon as possible and said they would focus on this case. Now they have organized a citywide police search, but it may take a while. The chief of the local police department, let me express my sincerest apology to you on his behalf. After seeing the angry look on his boss's face, the little secretary reported in a low voice, fearing that he would be harmed by the fish pond. It's none of their business. Some people want to die. We can't stop them. You go tell the people at the police station and we can handle our own company's matters ourselves. After hearing the secretary's words, Killian didn't feel anything about the police chief's apology. Gangsters are commonplace all over the world, let alone robberies, and it's only the year 2000, and technology development is far less advanced than it was after more than 20 years, so the police are often of no help. But for Killian, since these people are looking for trouble for him, don't blame him. And it just so happened that at this moment, Killian's phone rang. After waving his hand to signal the secretary to go out, Killian answered the call from Kennedy. Killian, I have heard the news from Director Robson, and I think I still need your help. After the call was connected, Kennedy on the other end of the phone spoke before Killian could speak first. You must know that Killian had someone specially send it to him. It is said that it can extend life. The security of a car is just for 3 bottles, and he specially arranged for someone to get it. You must know that he spent $1 billion for this thing, and one of the bottles was given to him by Killian. As a result, he was kidnapped on the way, and he even wanted to kill the director. In Florida, under his rule, such a vicious robbery happened, and he was still robbed. If this got publicized, he was sure he would be a big joke among so many state legislators for decades to come. But he knew that even if he was very angry, it would be unrealistic to ask the other party to find him. If he wanted to find the robber as soon as possible, he still needed Killian's help. Of course, Congressman Kennedy, believe me, he is not only a slap in the face of our state of Florida, but also a slap in the face of our pioneer technology companies. I will be responsible for following up on this matter. Killian also spoke about what Congressman Kennedy said. The output of the T0 model medicine itself is not high, and the cost of each bottle is very expensive. These must be purified from the sun staircase flowers. It can be said that one bottle requires several flowers to be used as raw materials. Although a lot of sun staircase flowers have been cultivated now, companies are not experimenting with this stuff anymore. Killian couldn't help but feel angry for a moment. Then he got up and drove to the island laboratory under the escort of bodyguards. How are experimental subjects 1 to 3 now? Can they be put into the battlefield? After passing through layers of security and arriving at the floor where experimental subjects 1 to 3 were transferred to the 40th floor underground, Killian asked Samuel, who was already trotting over. Boss, everything is going well. Although it is still in the experimental stage, based on the new brain control chip, combined with the existing smart control glasses, and based on the transmission of electromagnetic signals, we can immediately transmit the consciousness of the wearer through the signal. The method is transmitted to the tyrant's mind, so that the tyrant can be perfectly controlled. However, in the liberation mode, the control effect of the brain control chip will be greatly reduced. But we can adjust the tyrant's brain based on smart control glasses, and we can change what it sees in front of it. It can be regarded as control in disguise, but the uncertainty is still very high. After hearing Killian's words, Samuel also led the way to the laboratory and opened his mouth to report. After finishing speaking, he handed the pair of pure blue high-tech chip glasses to Killian. That's enough, box them up, I'm useful. After putting on the glasses, Killian saw the real-time monitoring panel of the 3 experimental subjects projected by the glasses as expected. Moreover, on the far right, he could accurately choose to control them individually or together, and after coming to the laboratory, Killian also continued to give orders to the 3 tyrants through smart glasses. What is gratifying is that it really works. With every command I give them, raising hands, running, hitting, and jumping can all be completed perfectly. Except for the idiot No. 1, I asked him to jump, and he really jumped up with all his strength, and his whole head got stuck on the ceiling. It was number 2 and number 3 who pulled it out. But overall, it was pretty good, and Killian immediately arranged for his employees to pack the 3 experimental tyrants and take them away. Boss, here, it's too dangerous, why don't you think about it again? At this time, after seeing that Killian was really going to take the 3 experimental subjects out, Samuel on the side couldn't help but persuade him. You must know that it is not a big deal if these 3 experimental subjects run away. If something goes wrong with your boss, how can you survive in this company? And if you can't survive, who will he find for the future Nobel Prize? Just tell me whether you have confidence in smart glasses. Regarding Samuel's words, Killian didn't say anything else, he just looked into the other person's eyes and asked directly. But, of course, Samuel was fully confident about his product, but after replying, he began to hesitate to persuade him. After all, scientific research was affected by too many external environmental factors. I trust you. Regarding Samuel's words, Killian just replied with 4 words, which made him stunned in place. At this moment, Samuel could only feel that the gratitude in his heart was surging uncontrollably. To say it was turbulent would not be an exaggeration. He did not expect that his boss would risk his own life because of his reply. It turned out to be like this. Believe in yourself. You have to know the boss of any other company, even if the things developed by his own relatives have to be tested before they are put into use. As for his boss, after a simple experiment, he decided to go with those 3 monsters with extremely terrifying fighting power. What kind of trust is this? Even the trust Captain America has in Bucky in the comics is just like this. At this moment, Samuel seemed to see his own God. Boss, let me go with you. The next moment, Samuel said to Killian in a very firm tone. He looked like he would be killed on the spot if he didn't take him with him. At this moment, Killian couldn't help but be startled when he saw Samuel's determined expression. However, he looked at him with a look of relief afterwards. After patting him on the shoulder, he only left a word of, "Okay," word and walked out. After a while, a convoy began to leave the island laboratory at a fast speed and headed towards Miami. On the other side, there is an abandoned wooden house deep in the mountain. Brother, why is Pioneer Technology, such a big company, transporting only these small vials? Didn't our robbery go in vain? In the room, a masked robber took off his mask and said with a frustrated face to the man who was lying on the sofa with his eyes closed to relax. Yeah, originally we thought it would be a car full of mobile phones this time, but it really doesn't work, even a projector will do. These gadgets from Pioneer Technology are now being sold at sky-high prices on the black market. A robber on the other side also said with a sigh after hearing what his companion said. They even imagined that if they could grab those things, maybe they would be billionaires now. There is now a saying circulating in the underground world that it is better to grab the products of Pioneer Technology than to grab gold and antiques. Okay, stop talking, I'm still thinking. These small bottles are definitely not as simple as we thought. Think about it with your idiot heads. If it's really just a few bottles and cans, how could those gang of police officers be searching for us all over the city like crazy? After turning on his cell phone and seeing the message from his younger brother, the boss, who was lying down with his eyes closed to relax, immediately sat up, and then shouted to everyone. Maybe we can make more money with this thing. Then he looked at the green vial in his arms, playing with it, and said. He had just received a message from a boy in the city. It could be said that the entire city was now buzzing with sirens, and the police were like crazy, constantly investigating every gang force. Anyone who resisted opened fire directly, and even requested helicopter support. All these things reveal how precious the things they grabbed were. When he thought of this, the man suddenly remembered something. He suddenly took out his mobile phone and dialed a number without a note, and then called out. Fisher. After the call was connected, the person on the other end of the phone seemed to be in disbelief and asked. Is there anyone else using this phone? The boss of the skeleton gang, named Fisher, couldn't help but smile playfully. Haha, you are so optimistic. Now the police are looking for you like crazy. Do you still have time to contact me? If you have anything to say it quickly, or I'm going to die. I don't want to face the red-eyed police by then. After hearing Fisher's words, the man on the other end of the phone just joked and said eagerly. Although only an hour had passed in the whole process, no matter which side it was as if a magnitude 7 earthquake had occurred. You must know that it is Pioneer Technology, a die-hard partner of the US government and military, and is hailed as the next Stark Group. Although everyone is joking that grabbing gold is not as good as grabbing pioneering technology, anyone with any brain knows how to choose between the two. And Fisher, a tough guy, actually did it. Now I have obtained something similar to a medical potion from Pioneer Technology. I need you to help me find the seller to sell it. As per the old rules, you take 30%. Fisher was not affected at all by the man's eagerness and continued to speak unhurriedly. There was no other reason. The person he contacted on the phone was one of the famous black marketeers in the Miami underground world. Their special responsibility was to sell stolen goods for others. Regardless of their source, as long as they were sold through him, they would be able to sell it. Even the jewelry and gold you snatched just a second ago will be sold to him as soon as you get them. It's just that the profit is 50% for jewelry, 40% for gold, and 30% for everything else. 30%, 50%. Otherwise, there's no need to talk. You can find someone else. There is no one crazier than me in the whole of Miami, or the whole of the United States. Believe me, they will not accept your goods. At this moment, the man also showed his fangs and stated his conditions directly and quickly. Just like what the man said, to be a black marketeer, you must have courage, your own intelligence network, and strong enough connections. But he didn't have any of these before. The only thing he had was enough madness. No matter what you rob, he will sell it. It is precisely because of this that most robbers will come to him to sell the stolen goods when other merchants dare not accept the stolen goods. And because of this, his fame began to grow. And because of this, he has dozens of secret strongholds in Miami. No one knows where he will be or what other strongholds he has. After hearing the man's words, Fisher was filled with anger at this moment. You must know that in order to rob Pioneer Technologies' goods, he not only ran all the way here, but also spent a lot of money to buy them. Pioneer Technologies' intelligence was taken action. As a result, with such a large investment, this vampire would earn half of his profit just by changing hands. Fortunately, the other party is not standing in front of him now, otherwise he swears that he will definitely let his PY kiss his shotgun and let him know what flowering is. But it makes no sense to say this now. No matter how angry he is, the man knows that only the other party can sell the stolen goods to him when he has no channels. Okay, 50%, but I want to take action before dawn. Then he gritted his teeth and said, "Good." After just a faint reply, the man hung up the phone. This vampire really dares to speak. 50%, why don't you support him to death? After hearing the words of their boss, several core members of the skeleton gang who were in the room at this moment couldn't help but feel the anger of the same enemy and spoke. Okay, at least now we know that this thing seems to be more valuable than we thought. Otherwise, that vampire wouldn't be able to cooperate with us. Regarding his younger brother's words, the man just said calmly after lighting a cigarette. Is this thing really so valuable? It looks like just a small drink bottle. At this time, after hearing what the boss said, a younger brother immediately came to the boss's side. After picking up the bottle containing the T-virus drug, he raised his eyes to it, and then face said curiously, "Be careful if it breaks. I won't pay you even if I sell it to you." After Fisher took the medicine bottle from his younger brother, he spoke to it with wide eyes and carefully put it into the low-temperature refrigerated suitcase. "Haha, I was wrong, boss." Regarding the boss's words, the younger brother couldn't help but shrink his head and apologize. You should know that others may say this just as a joke, but he has seen with his own eyes that their boss sold the organs of a younger brother who had caused the gang to lose a lot of profits due to an accident, and sold his organs in batches. After Fisher installed the potion, he received a message from the black marketeer within a few minutes. Port Bay Islands, 1 hour later, deposit of $5 million, totaling $200 million. Hey, boss, this vampire seems to be really something. The younger brother on the side couldn't help but said excitedly after seeing the message displayed on the boss's phone. Then another message popped up, and the man received a text message notification from the Swiss bank that $5 million had arrived. Very good. As long as we make this order, everyone will have nothing to worry about for the rest of their lives. After seeing the news, Fisher couldn't help but feel relaxed. Although $100 million would be taken away, even the remaining $100 million would be enough for them to spend the rest of their lives. You must know that prices in this era are not as expensive as in the future. Now you can buy a house in the center of New York for $200,000. Not to mention other places, you can easily buy luxury cars and villas for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And this means that their better days are not far away in the future. For a moment, everyone present couldn't help but feel the joy of being about to receive a huge sum of money. Even those who originally felt like wanting to kill the vampire couldn't help but feel a lot lighter, and even found the other person cute. Okay, pack your things, grab your guys, and get ready to go. After calming down again, Fisher gave instructions to the young men in front of him. Afterwards, in response to everyone's response, 3 pickup trucks started setting off from the abandoned wooden house. The other side. Dubai, how are you? Have you found the location of those people? In the departing motorcade, Krynn sat in a bulletproof armored vehicle and asked into the headset. There are too few surveillance cameras nearby and no obvious video traces were found. Sir, I have located the cell phone of Tiong Fisher, the leader of the skeleton gang. According to the data, he is now setting off from the Gambang Mountains and heading towards the Port Bay Islands. In addition, they have found the cellar and the purpose of going there is to sell the T0 potion. After hearing Kylian's words, Dubai in the headset immediately reported the results of his investigation. It's kind of interesting, knowing that there are people who want to buy my stuff. Don't worry, drive faster, I can't wait to see who that person is. After hearing Dubai's report, Krynn also said with a smile. It's just that anyone with a discerning eye can see in this smile that it's an angry smile. Under Kylian's instructions, the entire convoy speeded up again. At this moment, it was as if Kylian's emotions were felt through the smart glasses. Female experiment number 3 in the carriage felt unusually excited, and would burst into ghostly laughter from time to time. Number 1 felt a sense of doubt. Although he could feel the anger of the boss, in such a black box, there was nothing to be angry about. Didn't it feel good? It shakes from time to time, just like a massage. Because of the increased speed, the car body was now extremely bumpy, and the experimental subject's already heavy compartment with 3 people naturally trembled violently. Only number 1, the idiot, felt like a massage. The other side. As time passed, Fisher also led his younger brother and his team to the harbor. At this moment, the entire harbor except for a few scattered streetlights were still sticking to their posts, providing a little faint light to this already remote place. Lights outside. The whole place seemed extremely secluded and eerie. Boss, I've been watching this for almost an hour. Isn't that guy lying to us? I just took people around and there's no one in this place. At this time, after walking around with the AK, the younger brother came to Fisher's side again and complained. They were still counting on making a fortune from this order, but when the time came, the buyers showed no reaction at all. Don't worry, just wait. Take a few people and lie down on those containers, waiting for news from me, just in case. After hearing what his men said, Fisher, who was sitting on an abandoned chair, carefully looked at his surroundings and spoke. Hey, don't worry, boss, I understand. In response to the boss's words, the man holding the AK showed a meaningful smile. After speaking, he led the 2 people to climb towards the abandoned container. Only Fisher and the remaining 5 brothers were left waiting patiently for the buyer to arrive. Boss, someone is coming. After a while, with the sound of speedboats not far away, Fisher's younger brothers also stuck their heads out and looked into the distance. Get your own guys for me. If there is a situation, don't hesitate. At this time, after hearing what his men said, Fisher, who also stood up, saw the yacht not far away heading towards them, and then whispered to his men. After hearing the boss's instructions, the younger brothers involuntarily cocked their guns and became alert. After a while, a group of masked men armed with elite weapons and wearing brand new combat uniforms got off the ship and came to them. After seeing Fisher, the men's men also spread out to confront Fisher's men in a defensive formation. Where's the stuff? At this moment, the leading man looked at Fisher and spoke in a low voice. Here, where's the money? I will give you the goods only after I see the money. Believe me, this is just a small bottle. Even a slight collision may cause the contents inside to break. After Fisher glanced solemnly at the guards brought by the man, he then spoke in a warning manner. Originally, he was still thinking about taking advantage of others, but now it seems that it is good for him not to be taken advantage of. He even saw the most advanced SAR-21 fully automatic rifle made in Singapore, and even the FNFL fully automatic rifle made in Belgium. They are all the most advanced weapons at the moment, not to mention their equipment. For a while, even Fisher was a little unsure. We can only secretly hope for the professional ethics of these buyers. At the same time, I am very grateful for my previous arrangements. It's been turned around. After hearing Fisher's words, the man didn't say anything more. Instead, he sent a payment text message in front of the other party. Soon after, an "okay" reply came from the other side, and the man he spoke. Just when Fisher was about to question why his money had not arrived, a transfer message of 95 million United States dollars from a black market businessman appeared on his mobile phone. After seeing the payment message on his mobile phone, Fisher immediately showed a smile of relief, and then motioned to his men to hand over the metal box containing the medicine to them. But just as the two parties were preparing to deliver the goods, accompanied by the roar of cars, the fleet belonging to Pioneer Technology Company also rushed to the entrance of the port. "The people you brought here." After hearing the sound of a car in the distance, the man wearing a mask couldn't help but look at Fisher with an angry look and said, "I didn't. I also wanted to ask if he is one of your people." Hearing the man's anger, Fisher, who was still confused at this moment, responded and said back, "It's not safe here anymore, retreat." After glancing at the man's unpretentious expression, the masked man immediately asked someone to take the suitcase and prepare to leave. "Withdraw." After hearing the man's words, Fisher at this moment also took a deep look at the leaving people, and then Shin Yeong said, "Until now, since he is not the other party's person, there is only one possibility, that is, the police are chasing him. I don't know why they didn't turn on the siren, but it doesn't matter. Boss, won't you deal with them?" At this time, a team leader who was following the masked man couldn't help but approached and asked, "Keeping them can help us fend off the police pursuit. I don't want any more accidents." The masked man just said coldly and left quickly. Now, he doesn't know why, but he always feels that something is wrong here. However, everything is under control for Killian, who is currently standing at the entrance of the port and using an aerial drone to have an unobstructed view of the scene. At this moment, behind him, stood 3 teams, nearly 20 fully armed Black Watch soldiers, and there was also a Baymax combat type that had been improved and equipped with a combat rifle, which Killian also called T-700. After the soft and cute resin-filled exterior was removed, it was replaced by a metal steel frame structure inside. The entire body was like a Terminator, wrapped in black metal steel, leaving only a pair of red eyes. The scanner looked particularly scary in this night-shrouded environment. And this is why Killian calls them T-700. It's just that they, who should have been the focus of the audience in normal times, could not help but be overshadowed by the constant movement coming from the huge carriage behind Killian. Then, with Killian's help, the carriage door opened. The 3 experimental subjects immediately jumped out of the carriage. As experimental subject number 1, who has the most violent personality, after feeling that he was finally out of trouble, he began to look around with terrifying blood. However, what surprised him was that the current environment was actually the same as the scene when he entered before. There is a huge difference. Could it be that you can change places just by entering this iron box? For a moment, the sudden change of scene filled his mind, which was already weak due to the transformation, with questions. However, after looking at the surrounding scene and the iron box behind him, experimental subject number 1 still let out a huge roar, feeling excited about his affirmative decision. For a moment, along with the howl of experiment number 1, the roar immediately spread throughout the entire port. The sound waves even caused the surrounding weeds to stun, and the nearby mammals, the bigger ones still had the strength to run away, but the smaller ones, such as wild cats, were immediately knocked unconscious. Even Samuel, who was next to Killian, felt like he was going to be blown out, but he was still held back by the Black Watch soldiers. "What are you yelling at?" After hearing the huge roar coming from behind him, Killian was also startled, then turned his head and looked at the big fool speaking through signal transmission. "Ho ho ho, I don't know what I'm shouting either." In the eyes of outsiders, after Killian finished speaking, subject number 1 responded back to Killian. Even the Black Watch soldiers on the side couldn't help but subconsciously raise their guns and pointed them at experimental subject no. 1. For Killian, the meaning behind experimental subject number 1's roar could only be understood by him wearing smart glasses. But precisely because he understood it, he couldn't help but feel speechless. On the other side, there was the terrifying roar of experimental subject number 1, which was as terrifying as a beast from hell. The 2 parties in the port also heard it, and even their walking feet became weak for a time. What kind of monster is this? At this moment, one of Fisher's younger brothers was immediately frightened by the roar, and could not help but clench his teeth and say tremblingly, "You have to know that he has lived so long, let alone the terrifying roar that was similar to that of a wild beast just now. He has never even encountered such a roar in a horror movie. What's the name? You have killed more than 10 people, and you are still afraid of this little roar. After hearing that his little brother was so embarrassed at the critical moment, Fisher couldn't help but yell. I just don't know whether I'm yelling at him or taking the opportunity to cheer myself up. Coco, shut up. Just when the younger brother wanted to continue explaining, Fisher didn't give him a chance and yelled out. Something's wrong here. Let's go to the dock and let them take us. After observing the surroundings and making sure that no one outside had come in, Fisher suddenly thought and spoke to everyone. But, will they take us? Regarding the boss's order, the younger brothers at this moment couldn't help but be shocked at first and then spoke in astonishment. After all, with the momentum the opponent had just now, if a fight really broke out, there was no telling who would hit whom. In their eyes, even if they are not professional armed forces, they are at least professional mercenaries. If they fight local gangsters like them, isn't it like using anti-aircraft guns to kill mosquitoes? Trash, use your dwarf brain and think about it carefully. Is the thing in your hand used for eating? After hearing what the younger brothers said, Fisher at this moment said with hatred. If he had followed his past temper, he would really have attacked with one shot, but the situation was not right now, and he had to make the team unanimously respond to the outside world. Immediately, under Fisher's words and usual deterrence, the boys all picked up their weapons and walked towards the masked man staying at the dock not far away. When those people saw Fisher and others coming over, they subconsciously raised their guns. The atmosphere in the entire scene suddenly became tense, and they looked like they would fight if they could not reach an agreement. But before they could talk, they were greeted by a huge dong dong dong. The ground shook, and then they saw the most horrifying scene in their lives. They saw a pure white giant several meters tall, running towards them with a ferocious smile on his face. Next to them, a woman who looked a few sizes smaller was even more terrifying. With a gee smile, she crawled towards them like crazy with her hands full of sharp claws. The only one who seemed normal was the last giant in a windbreaker, unhurried and calm, walking slowly towards them. But even so, his steps did not fall behind those few people at all. What kind of monster is this? For a moment, after everyone saw this scene, after a brief brain shutdown, they came back to their senses, and then frantically pressed the trigger in their hands towards the number 3 experimental subject lying at the front. In this terrifying scene, facing the inhuman monster, only the long stick and small hook in his hand could bring him a sense of security. However, this time, with the simultaneous firing of more than 10 guns, even with intensive firepower, experimental subject number 3 was not even touched. Under the extremely fast speed and agile movement, the whole person was like a spider. Generally sensitive. Poof. Single quote. As experimental subject number 3 pierced the outermost gang member's body with his sharp claws, blood splattered everywhere in an instant. In addition, when the blood was scattered on number 3's body, combined with her extremely weird and creepy form, the fear in the hearts of everyone present reached its peak in an instant. Run. For a moment, someone didn't know who yelled, and then everyone in the skeleton gang present began to roll and crawl towards the surroundings. Some even jumped directly into the sea, hoping to escape from the devil's cave. However, before he swam out for long, he felt a sudden darkness in front of him, and a shadow directly enveloped him. Then he saw the most terrifying scene in his life. I saw a giant with blue and red eyes, twisting him up with a curious look on his face, and then without waiting for him to scream, he directly scratched his brain with his sharp nails. Even when he was dying, he saw the other party holding his head and observing it carefully in front of him, like a Frankenstein. But to men, the other party is already a terrifying monster comparable to a demon. When everyone at the scene saw this scene, they wished that their parents would give them less legs, and they started running hysterically. But in the face of these extraordinary tyrant experimental subjects, if they don't go their own way, but can unite together, maybe there is still a chance of a comeback. At this moment, the buyer who was watching not far away had already taken advantage of the commotion and boarded the speedboat to escape. The corners of his mouth under the smart glasses could not help but reveal a playful smile. Immediately after he tapped his forehead with his finger, experimental subject number 2 not far away instantly threw the gangster in his hand toward the container not far away with great grace. Then the whole person grinned, and after bending the body and sinking, with the sudden force of the lower limbs, the whole person instantly flew towards the speedboat like a precision-guided missile. Then the group of buyers just turned around and saw this horrific scene. Just when they felt that their death was coming, they found that the other party stopped instantly when they reached the bow of the ship. The whole process was as smooth as if the pause button had been pressed. And this is not what scares them the most. The most terrifying thing is that when they subconsciously want to pull the trigger in their hands, they find that their bodies do not obey their orders at all. The whole person seemed to be paralyzed. Except for the remaining eyes, he could not stop moving, trying to determine whether he was really paralyzed. But for him now, these actions have no meaning. Under Killian's remote command, experimental subject number 2 first spread out with his left hand, and then the cryogenic chamber in the hands of the leading masked man also floated towards the hands of experimental subject No. 2. Then, with one hand slightly clenched, he controlled the cryogenic tank and flew to the port. The Black Watch team, who was already in position, accurately held it. At this time, after seeing that he had gotten the goods back, Killian no longer continued to take care of it, but let go of his mind and allowed his babies to start to play freely. As Killian's will mapping ended, an inexplicable smile began to appear on the corner of experimental subject number 2's mouth. It's just that this smile looks even more terrifying to the masked man who is currently facing experimental subject No. 2. A super tall giant suspended in the air, a terrifying monster with superpower, plus the crazy female monster. The whole thing has entered the alien's nest. Now he only regrets why he came here for these things and risked his own life. It was just as if experimental subject number 2 was interested in him, or had the intention to torture him, after turning his body towards his subordinates. He was so frightened that he became incontinent. I saw that each of my subordinates began to collapse towards the center as if under an invisible force. In the end, the whole person was even crushed into a huge piece of flesh. And there is another subordinate who is also being ravaged by an invisible force. And what frightens the masked people the most is that this monster seems to be observing them. Every time it attacks someone, it will pull the other person very close and then torture them with all their heart. Finally, it will reveal a picture of the person. The way you think. He looked like a demon escaping from hell. And after more than 10 minutes, the masked man was completely frightened and stunned. At this time, experimental subject number 2 looked at him and couldn't help showing a look of disgust. Because of the excrement all over his body, even the corner of his mouth was drooling after he fainted from fright. Under such circumstances, experimental subject number 2 lost interest in continuing to study it. After compressing it to the extreme, it stopped caring and flew back in the direction it came from. On the other side, experimental subject number 3 at this moment also received his last toy. I saw a frightened Fisher who was huddled in the corner and didn't dare to move. Just when he heard the shouts at the scene and became silent, he thought the monsters had run away. At this moment, bursts of crying sounded in his ears. Immediately, the whole person suddenly felt the hair on his head stand up, and then subconsciously turned his head to look. All he saw was the long-haired female monster who was full of blood and had a weird look on her face. She was covering her eyes with her flesh-stained claws, crying while looking through her fingers with her scarlet eyes. The distance between the two people was almost face to face. Ah! At this moment, Fisher let out an unprecedented scream, and then with extreme fear, his crotch could not help but feel wet and hot, and he was so scared that he peed. At this moment, after feeling the scream of the prey, subject number 3 was finally satisfied, and immediately let out a shrill laugh of, "Hehehehe." Subsequently, accompanied by Fisher's hysterical screams, subject number 3 directly used his clawed arms to cut open Fisher's chest. The ribs were broken at a touch, and then he in his frightened eyes, which was about to faint, experimental subject number 3 took out the heart inside. Blood flowed uncontrollably from Fisher's chest. At this moment, experimental subject number 3 was also facing the delicious food in front of him and began to feast. For them who are biological and chemical weapons, they can only survive on nutrient solution every day in the laboratory. How can they be like now, following a good boss and eating such a rich meal? Compared to here, experiment number 3 was eating leisurely. Experimental subject number 1 was like Zubaji eating ginseng fruit. On the entire battlefield, as long as they were dead or alive, he stuffed them all into his ferocious big mouth, without even chewing them. Just swallowed it. The whole thing is a garbage recycling machine, specializing in recycling site garbage. Even at the end of the meal, except for the rendering full of blood, there were no scattered parts in the entire dock. At this time, experimental subject number 1 was also grinning widely, looking around with his scarlet eyes with an unsatisfied expression. It was as if he wanted to find out if there were any prey that he had missed. In the end, I just saw experiment number 3 in the corner, which had already eaten the heart of the prey. But at this moment, the corners of experimental subject number 1's originally relaxed mouth couldn't help but raise again in an instant, because number 3 usually only eats the heart, but now, the prey's body didn't move at all. After pointing at the opponent and then at the prey at the opponent's feet, subject number 3 turned his head and walked out to mind his own business. She doesn't care about eating low-quality scraps like this. After seeing number 3 leaving, number 1's mouth instantly opened into a smile, and he grabbed it without hesitation and stuffed it into his mouth. In a short time, the scene was cleared by experimental subject number 1. Immediately, several experimental subjects gathered towards where Krynn was. Boss, although I don't want to say it, no matter how confident I am in my products, some necessary safety tests are indispensable. It's really too risky for you to do this now. Can I sincerely request you, never happen again? After seeing that the scene was under control, Samuel, who finally breathed a sigh of relief at this moment, began to persuade with a scared look on his face. Ha ha ha, I promise, there will never be a next time, but let's not say that these smart glasses are quite easy to use. Who was responsible for coming out? After hearing what Samuel said, Krynn also said with a smile after experiencing it. It's Dr. Alto, your new recruit, boss. He previously researched the integration of black technology into smartphones, and then developed this multifunctional integrated smart glasses. And after I discovered that it could be used as a portable operating panel for smart chips, I improved and optimized it, and it became what you have now, boss. However, there are many other risks that cannot be predicted. Theoretically, this type of smart glasses transmits signals through brain waves, but it is not yet certain whether there will be any other effects between the two transmissions. Especially when things like the man just happened, there are too many uncontrollable factors, boss. Seeing that the boss in front of him wanted to change the topic, Samuel also returned the topic to the original place after answering and continued to advise earnestly. Okay, but from this point of view, Dr. Otto is indeed a talent. What do you think of him? Regarding Samuel's words, Krynn spoke in his own mind. Well, he is a high-tech talent in cutting-edge technology. I have seen his research topics and current projects. He is doing very well in mobile phone batteries and has many innovative ideas. If he focuses on energy technology, I believe that he will know less than me. This time, after hearing the boss's words, Samuel thought carefully before answering. Although the two have only met a few times, they can analyze each other's strength just by looking at each other's past research projects and topics. It has to be said that he and Alto are very similar, that is, they teach in a college and have no place to display their talents. He had to live an ordinary life in the college. Well, I trust your judgment. You may be able to collaborate on common projects in the future. Work hard, Samuel. I believe in you. You won't let me down. After hearing Samuel's objective evaluation of Alto, Krynn nodded immediately. After patting the other person's shoulder happily, he turned and walked towards the armored vehicle. At this moment, a group of Black Watch teams also started their own cleaning tasks. After wearing professional cleaning protective clothing, they also began to use special disinfectant and a series of disinfection measures to clean the entire dock. In a short time, the originally messy pier was restored to its previous appearance thanks to the professional cleaning capabilities of the Black Watch team. In order to create the illusion that no one had been here for a long time, the members of Black Watch also cleaned up the surrounding areas. The ash in the place began to be evenly spread on the ground. The whole place, unless one looked carefully, would not even seem like a massacre had occurred here. After dealing with these people, Krynn, who was originally angry because of being robbed, couldn't help but feel relieved. Then he took his bodyguards onto their respective armored vehicles. The 3 experimental subjects also went through a comprehensive disinfection process and cleaned their bodies before returning to their own carriages. During this process, subject number 1 only felt that he should give them a 5-star rating for those members of the Black Watch team who worked particularly hard to clean him. Awesome. Then, as the car started, the entire convoy began to drive towards the company slowly. This time, because they were not in a hurry, the experimental subjects in the carriage felt extremely comfortable during the entire journey, especially number 1, who felt much better than when he came. He decided to give the driver a good review this time. In this way, there was no trouble along the way. Except for a few scattered cars occasionally passing by on the main road, there were no more twists and turns. However, when the convoy passed a small town on the edge of a city, a pure purple luxury car was parked at the corner of the town not far away. And if you look closely, you can see a man talking crazily about something while forcing a woman into a corner. But what made Krynn curious was that under such a commotion, the surrounding houses were clearly lit with lights, but no one came out to help, or even looked through the windows. And all these weirdness made Krynn feel a little strange and abnormal. Although his instinct told him that it was better to ignore this matter, there was another villain in Krynn's subconscious telling him that there might be unexpected gains. And while Krynn was still hesitating, the woman not far away who had been slowly forced into a corner by the man stumbled over as if she had seen a savior after seeing their motorcade appear. Staggeringly, he pushed the man away and ran over. But before he could get in front of Krynn, he was irradiated by a group of heavily armed Black Watch soldiers with infrared aim. At this moment, the woman knew deeply that if she moved again, she would probably be shot into a hornet's nest. But the only thing that made her more fortunate was that the other party was not only targeting her, but also the man who was chasing her. After thinking about this clearly, the woman could no longer hold on and fell down. Sorry, this is my girlfriend. We just had a fight, so there may be a misunderstanding. She has hypoglycemia now. I need to take her to the hospital. Can I take her away? At this time, the man not far away, unexpectedly, after seeing being pointed at by the infrared ray, did not panic at all, but looked at it lightly, raised his arm in a gesture of surrender, and then he said calmly and with a smile. For him now, it's like talking to a friend. But in the next second, his expression began to change in a way that was visible to the naked eye, and he gradually felt that something was wrong. Superpowers, suspected of mind control. According to Plan Number 7, everyone should pay attention to themselves, start to retreat, and request T-700 for assistance. At this time, after being keenly aware that something was wrong, the leader of the Black Watch team immediately began to focus on pointing the gun in his hand at the opponent, but this time he was aiming at the man's arm and other parts, and then quickly give an order. After hearing the captain's order, the others quickly retreated and moved the muzzle of their guns from the man's chest to his limbs. For a time, from the sudden change on the man's face, he finally found that there were no more red spots on his chest, and instead, his limbs were covered with dense red spots. For a moment, although he didn't know the situation at the scene, when he thought of his childhood memories, his heart, which he thought he didn't care about anymore, couldn't help but tremble again. Only this time, he didn't dare to move, because he found that these people were well trained and might have come specifically to capture him, and if he moved, they might really know how to shoot. Immediately, while raising his hands, the man began to try to use his abilities to control the people around him to walk out of the house. But before he could continue, he only saw a bunch of things that looked exactly like Terminators walking off the armored vehicle. If not for this moment, he could clearly feel that there was no problem with his abilities. He even thought he was hypnotized by someone else. Just kidding, that's the Terminator. Who has never seen a famous movie that is famous all over the world, and it actually appeared in front of him alive? At this moment, he couldn't even imagine which organization sent this thing to arrest him. With this equipment, what can we do but unify the world? It's nothing to do with him, an innocent passerby who just wants to pursue true love. But no matter how much the man collapsed, the T-700 still walked towards him with a willful pace, using its terrifying infrared probe eyes and holding the rifle. Then when he got close, he was knocked unconscious with an elbow. Another robot immediately put special shackles and handcuffs on the man, and the plan to capture the superpower was fully completed. Under Krynn's remote command, the T-700 directly picked it up and threw it into the carriage containing 3 experimental subjects. At this moment, while watching the iron box being reopened, experimental subject number 1 found that the scenery outside him had indeed changed. I can't help but feel more recognized for my intelligence. Sure enough, I can change my place when doing this thing. What made him even more happy was that the boss actually fed him food again. It seems that he knew that he was not full just now and wanted some after-dinner snacks. But the next moment, experimental subject number 1's face fell at a speed visible to the naked eye. Because Killian's order came, let him look at this dwarf winter melon, which was shorter than a dwarf winter melon. It was like a little soybean. His own arms were not as thick as his own, so he really couldn't imagine what use this guy had. However, it was the boss's order, so experimental subject number 1 had to sit down in front of the man, lowered his head and smelled it. Although it is said not to be eaten, smelling it can satisfy your cravings. At this time, outside, after finishing dealing with the man, looking back, the Black Watch soldiers who were originally close to the man couldn't help but feel a little dazed even when they walked. It can only be said that the man's ability is extremely terrifying to even the strong-willed Black Watch soldiers, and if he continues to stay, he will probably be completely controlled. The team leader of Black Watch suppressed the discomfort rolling in his brain, and after speaking to Killian, he returned to the armored vehicle with the help of several members of the convoy. At this time, the members of the original first convoy were also dispersed into several subsequent armored vehicles because they lost their combat effectiveness. A few more soldiers were removed from them to replace the original Black Watch soldiers. "Boss, what should I do with that girl?" At this time, the temporary team leader who had just taken over asked Killian after looking at the woman who fainted on the ground not far away. "Take it back and place it on the negative floor first." After hearing what his men said, Killian also began to think. Although he couldn't remember the current scene, the man's ability and purple costume just reminded him of a superhero in Marvel. Ability user, Purple Man, an ordinary person who gains superpowers by chance. And the ability can still control others. This also allowed him to accomplish something that many men could only imagine, which was to build his own harem. But gradually the man found that he was tired of playing, and then met his right girl, Jessica Jones. A person with the same superpower has tremendous strength and reaction speed, and is even said to be able to fly in the later stages. The living Marvel version of Superwoman only looks like she has been hacked by countless knives. But even if this is the case, it cannot change the fact that this powerful person. Although I'm not sure if the other party is him, I was able to catch this guy who was suspected of being a purple man. Even though he was not far away just now, as an ordinary woman, I wanted to reach him in a blink of an eye. Only when I was about to reach the front of his car did I being stopped by Black Watch soldiers as enough to prove his ability. You must know that because of the incident with the pharmaceutical company, the soldiers of Black Watch have always taken high standard measures to protect Killian's safety. It can be said that if ordinary people can get close to 10 meters, they will be warned by the soldiers of Black Watch, and if they approach deliberately again, they will be greeted by bullets. But this time, the Black Watch soldiers almost didn't react. I have to say that this proved this woman's ability from the side. So Killian decided to take her back based on the principle of, if you miss something, don't let it go. Moreover, while the soldiers were helping each other, Killian had his people collect the hair on his body, as well as the wound tissue and blood that he, accidentally, broke when he fell to the ground. I'm afraid there are some other organizations with ulterior motives that use women's DNA to do bad things. Boss, what are you? At this time, after seeing that his boss actually arranged for someone to collect cell samples from a strange woman, Samuel on the side couldn't help but said with a puzzled look. This woman's body is not simple. When we return to the base later, you will arrange for a special person. Forget it, you will be responsible for this project yourself. If my guess is correct, then we may have been really lucky lately. At this moment, looking at the biological sample that was suspected to be Jessica Jones, stored in front of him, Killian couldn't help but smile and then spoke. After all, if this woman is really Jessica Jones, then he has recently gained 3 superhumans. Black Widow, Jessica Jones, the Purple Man. It's a pity that there is no time, otherwise Killian would want to collect Luke Cage's. If he remembers correctly, Luke Cage is still Jessica Jones's husband, but he doesn't know if the two are together now. But looking at the current place and looking at Jessica Jones who was being chased, Killian estimated that it was just the beginning. The current Jessica Jones has either just fallen into the pursuit and control of the Purple Man, or she is trying to break away from the Purple Man's control midway. After all, the Purple Man's control ability will gradually decrease with the passage of time, and he will also be resisted by his strong will. In the original work, there are only a few people who can withstand the control of the Purple Man. In one comic, the Purple Man even controlled Tony and asked him to make a brainwave amplifier similar to Professor X, with the intention of controlling him, worldwide. Anyway, it's just an abridged version of Professor X. Oh, after hearing what the boss said, Samuel couldn't help but become interested at this time. At this moment, he couldn't wait to return to his laboratory. On the other side, as time passed, the man who had fainted in the carriage began to regain consciousness little by little as water drops continued to fall on his face. What kind of water is this? It smells so bad. Just when the man regained consciousness and was still half asleep, he felt the moisture on his face. Then he started to wipe his face with his hands, trying to wipe it clean. However, the more he wiped it, the more fishy it became. The smell reached his nose, and there was even a disgusting smell of death, and the man couldn't help but murmur. Then, suddenly, as if he thought of something, the man suddenly opened his eyes. What came into view was a huge head with a bloody mouth that he didn't know how to describe. It was grinning at him, and it was only at this time that he saw clearly what had fallen on his face. Water is obviously the saliva of this monster. At this time, the man couldn't help but start trying to get closer to the wall. I was afraid that I would be swallowed by the huge monster in front of me. As for ability control, there was no thought in his mind at this moment. Not to mention whether it is possible to control it, as long as the other party hesitates for a moment, it is enough to chew him into pieces with that big mouth several times. At this moment, the man clearly knew what the devil's fangs were. The person in front of him was a complete devil. Because he had been controlling people's hearts since he was a child, he could clearly see the naked desire to eat him in the other person's eyes. But now I don't know why I have restrained myself. Ever since, along the way, the man didn't dare to move at all, let alone mind control. Even after crawling tremblingly to the corner, he didn't dare to move any more. Because he found that every time he climbed a little bit, the huge monster would get closer to him. Full of great expectations for delicious food, and the saliva continued to flow on the man's body. At this moment, the man could only huddle in the corner weakly and helplessly, hoping that the organization behind this monster would give him a decent death. After a while, as the carriage stopped, the man heard the huge opening sound of the entire underground gate and the footsteps of various personnel in full gear. And after hearing this, the man's heart suddenly became cold. I have truly entered the wolf's den. Immediately, as the carriage door opened again, the man saw only the Terminator robot that had knocked him unconscious before him, standing guard on both sides and outside of the carriage. At this moment, the three monsters next to him also made some movement. The three monsters walked out in order from small to large. And when the huge monster walked out, he didn't forget to pick him up with his hands and take him out with him. After going out, the man discovered that he was surrounded by a highly sealed high-tech laboratory. And he was in a huge space that was completely isolated by transparent glass. Except for the Terminator and the three monsters next to him, the other humans were outside the transparent glass and were meticulously doing their own thing, matter. But as he got out of the car, he found that many researchers were looking towards him from time to time. And this kind of look was not too familiar to him. When he was very young, his parents also looked at him with the same look. In the end, he just happened to get his current abilities. And now we have to make the same mistake again. For a time, the original fear of death was gradually broken by the horrific experiences his parents brought to him when he was a child. Just when the man began to exude purple energy all over his body and wanted to fight to the death, accompanied by bang sound, experimental subject number 1 simply bounced the man's head off. He directly suppressed the momentum that the man had just brewed. And with the hand of experimental subject number 1, the man fainted again. No matter how much experimental subject number 1 spared his hand, After all, the difference in size and strength was there, and the bullet was still aimed at the head. At this moment, even everyone in the observation room couldn't help but feel unforgettable pain. Doctor, according to data analysis, there were traces of the ability used by the other party when they saw us just now, and based on the data collection and sampling at the scene, it can now be determined to be mainly mental control ability. Similar substances were found in another biological sample you brought back. At this moment, a researcher walked up to Samuel, who had already put on a white coat, with a piece of field research data and reported diligently. It's interesting. No wonder the boss brought him back specially. He will be designated as a first-level research target starting today. His abilities may be of great help to the subsequent development of Tyrant. After receiving the researcher's data, Samuel immediately started to read it. After seeing that the magnetic field at the scene reacted violently, and the man's brain waves were particularly active, Samuel couldn't help but smile, and then he ordered to the researcher on the side. First-level research targets are mainly classified according to their biological value. It can only be said that the 3 experimental subjects in front of me are all level 1. Except for number 2, which is a bit special and may be considered for upgrade later, the others are all normal level 1. And this man was listed as level 1 by Samuel when he first arrived. Level, which is sufficient to prove the developability of its capabilities. Okay, doctor, this is the cell test report on the biological sample you brought back. According to instrument testing, the cells of this biological sample are highly active, and their own cells are dozens or even hundreds of times more than ordinary human cells. The most intuitive manifestation is that the speed of nutrient transmission slows down, but the quality of nutrient transmission increases. This also allows the host to stay hungry for a long time after eating once, and its physical strength is also very human. In short, according to our calculations, if the owner of this biological cell is still there, he can fight our type 1 biological tyrant. After hearing the doctor's words, the researcher immediately took out another test report on biological cells. After handing it to Samuel, he spoke excitedly. You must know that the special thing about this cell is that it is completely a human cell. It is not like the T-virus that fuses with human cells and symbiotically engulfs other viruses to strengthen itself and feed back to the human body. This cell means that it is very powerful in itself, and if the owner of this cell is used as a tyrant experimental subject, it is not impossible that it may even be dozens or even hundreds of times stronger than the existing tyrant. And by that time, what they should consider is not the power of biological weapons, but how to declare global unification. It's just that these are too far away for researchers. The owner of the biological cells themselves is the focus. This is simply unbelievable. Such a large amount of energy can be stored in small cells. If it were an ordinary person's cells, they would have collapsed. My God, how many hidden secrets are there waiting for us in this world? After taking over the data from the researcher, Samuel became more and more surprised as he looked at it. In the end, he seemed to be overwhelmed by a wave of happiness. He was both surprised by the magic of nature and himself. In the future, I can rely on my current status to reach more and more people like this. Yes, as the company develops, he believes that no matter how much the boss invests in robot projects or other military weapons projects, the development of the human body itself will never be left behind. All great power belongs to oneself. This is by no means just talk. Unless the boss would rather give up his identity as a flesh and blood human being and become a robot made of nothing but bare steel. For this reason alone, it would be impossible to believe even if Samuel was killed. He knew that his boss would definitely invest in the development of human superpowers at any cost. Even in the end, it is not impossible to make a man-made god. As he comes into contact with more and more things, Samuel discovers more and more that the gods in ancient myths may just be the product of genetic mutations by chance. Just like the man in front of him who was dragged into the laboratory like a dead dog. And if such a person returned to ancient times, would he also become a god worshipped by all living beings? Like Zeus, like Poseidon. At this moment, in Samuel's heart, the idea of creating a god became more and more intense. On the other side, after Krynn asked someone to take the woman to the first floor to rest. At this time, the female researcher who cleaned the other party's body also found the other party's ID card, Jessica Jones. This can be regarded as complete support for Killian's judgment, but it doesn't matter to him anymore. Anyway, Jessica's biological samples have been obtained. As long as he is willing, he can immediately clone thousands of her. So after confirming the identity of the other party, Killian returned to his villa with satisfaction and rested peacefully. The next day, in a room with white walls and the light of incandescent lights above her head, Jessica Jones, who had fallen into a deep coma due to excessive stress and exhaustion, couldn't help but use her arms to cover her head, light, and then go back to sleep. But suddenly Jessica woke up with the strange smell in the room and the light that was completely different from her own room. Then, he stood up and saw that besides the hospital bed where he was lying, there were several medical instruments next to him. And there was no one else in the room except her. At this time, Jessica also keenly felt something was wrong, and her clothes were changed. The whole person looked as if he had been washed all over. In the past 2 days, because he kept evading the pursuit of Kilgrave, the Purple Man, his body was covered with dirt and there was no time to wash it off. Now he is so clean that it is hard to find it, believe. Although she didn't know what her situation was now, she had already become extremely defensive after being hunted by the Purple Man for so long. Now she only knew that her instinct told her to be cautious, and after casually breaking the legs of the steel stool placed nearby, Jessica held it firmly in her hands, and then began to point by point. He poked his head outside. Unexpectedly, there was no one guarding the place outside as she had imagined. Did I think wrongly? Was rescued. Single quote. At this moment, Jessica couldn't help but start asking herself questions. After all, if she remembers correctly, she was stopped by someone from a convoy before she passed out. But now that she appears in a hospital-like place, she was either saved by the owner of the convoy or was killed by the Purple Man. He was imprisoned and was playing other tricks. After all, this is no longer unusual for Jessica. In order to hunt her down, Zirin even arranged various scenarios for her to do after catching her several times, including rescuing people, kidnapping, and bombing. Explosions, etc. Anyway, according to that guy's intention, in order to prove his love, he would do all kinds of crimes for her. Then she was asked to defeat him, save the citizens, and fulfill Jessica's superhero dream. There were so many things like that she even felt that the other person was a pervert in the end. But there was nothing she could do about it. The guy's abilities were too perverted. If he got even closer, she would be controlled, let alone anything else. And just as Jessica was walking outside and thinking, around the corner, a group of Black Watch patrol soldiers also walked towards Jessica. At this moment, Jessica began to understand the scene before her collapse last night again. If she remembered correctly, it was this group of unknown armed personnel who targeted her and the Zirin guy at the same time. Hey, I want to ask, did you save me? After seeing that although the other party was holding a gun but not raising it towards her, Jessica endured the violent impulse in her heart and spoke to the other party. However, this group of Black Watch patrol soldiers did not answer Jessica's question. Instead, after passing directly over the opponent, they continued patrolling towards the next place. They're patrol officers here and they're not going to answer any questions. If you want to ask who saved you, then it was my boss, Mr. Killian, chairman of Pioneer Technology, who decided to save you. But in fact, it is not necessary. After all, it was just a little help. For us at Pioneer Technology, it is to give back to the public, serve the public, and fight against all injustices. Of course, if you want to find out who changed your clothes, you can rest assured that it was changed by our female nurse here, and there will be no intrusion on your privacy. At this time, just when Jessica was about to catch up and ask more carefully, Samuel came up with 2 Black Watch soldiers and said to Jessica with a smile on his face, "Thank you for saving me. I want to ask, where was the other man yesterday?" After hearing what Samuel said, she finally saw a person with no malicious intent. At this time, Jessica also hurriedly asked. Now she urgently needs to know what happened last night. After all, if Zirin is still outside, she won't want to go out again even if she has 100 courages. That guy Zirin seemed to have identified her. No matter where she was hiding for so long, the other party always found various ways to find her. He even threatened her with the lives of some innocent people. But the good thing is that the other party is also afraid of causing too much trouble, and has never been too arrogant. Otherwise, she really doesn't know what she would do. Are you talking about that man? He has been arrested by the police for multiple crimes of homicide and attempted murder. Don't worry, according to the latest bill, the best outcome for him is to cooperate with the drug trials of major pharmaceutical companies and then die. There is absolutely no other possibility, and you will never see him again in the future. After hearing Jessica's words, Samuel, who had already checked her background, immediately answered calmly with a smile on his face. Real. After hearing Samuel's words, Jessica at this moment was extremely excited and wanted to get together to confirm this exciting news. However, before she could get closer, she was stopped by two security personnel nearby. You must know that Samuel is the general person in charge of this underground base. Although he is inside the base, his own security is never relaxed. The two necessary Black Watch soldiers in the base follow for personal protection, and outside the base, that is at least 2 or more teams. Sorry, I got excited. After seeing this, Jessica was stunned for a moment, and after she realized what she was doing, she spoke apologetically. Of course it's okay, it's understandable. I learned about you from the police, and you were in trouble during this time. This is my assistant, he will take you out of here next. There is already a police sergeant waiting for you above. You just need to complete the transcript and you will be free. For Jessica, Samuel responded to the other party's questions with full tolerance and a smile on his face. Even at the end, when Jessica walked into the elevator under the guidance of her assistant, she couldn't help but feel annoyed that her recklessness had caused the other party's security guard to have some irritating reactions. After reaching the ground and walking along the corridor to the end, Jessica saw 2 policemen waiting for her outside with the cooperation of the secretary. The whole scene gave Jessica an extremely inconsistent feeling. It's as if it's unusual for these police officers to have a good attitude towards this company. After all, shouldn't the police investigate the matter directly and find the person involved? Why are they still waiting outside? However, Jessica just thought about these details and did not pay too much attention to them. Instead, she walked outside under the leadership of her assistant. But when passing by the lobby, Jessica glanced at the front desk of the lobby. Pioneer Technologies Pharmaceuticals. Single quote. After reading it, at this moment, Jessica completely understood the attitude of these police officers. This can be said to be the most influential large company in the minds of the people now. If she hadn't had no money, she would have wanted to buy a Pioneer Technology mobile phone. Hello, Ms. Jessica, there are some issues here that I would like to invite you to cooperate with. If you are free now, please come with us. After seeing Jessica come out, a slightly pot-bellied police officer not far away also took the initiative to speak with a smile on his face. Of course it's no problem, thank you. At this time, Jessica smiled back at the police chief in front of her. Although they did not come out during her previous encounter, after all, it involved superpowers, and she even wanted to take the initiative to go to prison to escape. But as soon as she thought that after she first entered the police station, Ziren controlled everyone in the police station to come to her, she gave up the idea. All in all, if you don't specifically care about these things, Ziren is basically invincible. Ms. Jessica, this is our company's business card and contact number. If you have any questions later, you can contact us as soon as possible and we will do our best to solve it for you. When Jessica was about to follow a few people, the receptionist on the side handed over a business card with a smile and handed it to Jessica's hand. After seeing this, the expressions of the 2 police officers next to them softened even more. They didn't say they were respectful to Jessica along the way, but they also explained in a good voice what they were going to ask about, and also specifically explained that if she didn't have a meal, they could take her to have a meal first. Anyway, it allowed Jessica to experience what it means to be treated in the upper class. On the other side, after sending Jessica away, Samuel arrived at the 38th underground floor. Here, there is a dense row of cultivation cabins. The whole is a cultivation room, but many of them have not been put into use yet, and Samuel's goal is to walk straight towards the main console inside. PhD. After seeing the doctor coming, the research team here also nodded and greeted politely. Well, how's it going now? Samuel then asked. The experiment is going well. The vital signs are all normal. Boss, according to your request, the maturation catalytic time has been increased. It is expected that it will be completely mature in 1 day. One researcher replied. After nodding, Samuel looked at the surrounding cultivation cabins and observed. Then after a simple operation, he saw a cultivation cabin with a human figure being transported along the conveyor belt. After a while, it was time to come to the main console. The researchers on the side saw this scene and did not ask any more questions. They just stood silently behind Samuel. After all, he was the first person in charge. At this moment, as the training cabin approached, the figure inside was fully revealed. A naked black-haired girl who looked to be 16 or 17 years old at most was curled up like a baby at this moment, breathing through a respirator on her mouth. And under Samuel's gaze, he seemed to notice something. The girl couldn't help but open her eyes. After seeing Samuel in front of her, she began to struggle unconsciously. At this time, under Samuel's control, as the culture chamber opened, the nutrient solution immediately dissipated, visible to the naked eye through the bottom of the culture chamber. A female researcher on the side also took off her white coat and walked to the girl's side under the signal of Samuel's eyes, covering her exposed areas, wrapping the girl's petite body. It's just that at this time, the girl was like a newly born baby. In addition to being trembling uncontrollably, she was lying in the researcher's arms with an extremely fragile and helpless look. Data. Seeing this scene, Samuel didn't have any sympathy and just said coldly, "Boss, the target's brain fluctuates strongly, and the data is rising significantly. The body's cells reacted particularly strongly. According to the current numerical analysis of body data, if he continues to be cultivated in the culture chamber, he should be able to become the next Captain America." After hearing what Samuel said, the researchers on the side also hurriedly looked at the data report in their hands. Start testing. Following Samuel's order, a group of researchers also began to teach the girl bit by bit, from the most basic physical activities to jumping, running, etc. And the girl lived up to expectations and mastered these skills with extremely fast learning efficiency, as if they were engraved in the girl's DNA, and now they are only gradually unlocked. Gradually, as time went by, from day to night, with constant guidance, the girl finally learned some basic skills. At this time, the girl clenched her fists, in a fighting posture, and faced the strength testing instrument in front of her with a serious face. Start. Then, following Samuel's command, the girl punched hard and said, "Bang." Single quote. There was only a huge noise, and a sonic boom was emitted by it. At this moment, the data on the strength testing instrument continued to break through at an extremely fast speed, until it finally reached 4,891 kilograms. After seeing this, the researchers on the side couldn't help but show expressions of surprise. You must know that although they have been exposed to the robot project or the tyrant project before, they can achieve such results, but these are real human beings. And he is a replicant who was born less than a day ago, and he has such a powerful power. If he continues to be cultivated, wouldn't he become a true superpower? Everyone present could not help but think so. And this is even more true for Samuel. You must know that according to the official data released on Captain America, his upper limb snatch capacity is only 800 pounds, approximately 362 kilograms, and the clean and jerk is only 1,200 pounds, approximately 544 kilograms. Even if the strength may increase with a direct hit, it will only be more than a ton at most. 2 tons of overwhelming force. But you must know that the girl in front of you has a force of over 10,000 pounds in this blow, which is nearly 5 tons. Far surpassing Captain America, and in the future, if he continues to grow, it is estimated that doubling his current strength will not be a problem. If you combine the power of the T-virus and the extremis virus, imagine the all-round enhancement that can instantly increase the physical fitness of an ordinary person dozens of times, and then use it on such a human being who is a superpower in his own right. Artificial God. At this moment, Samuel seemed to see God placing the fruits of his thoughts in front of him. But for Samuel, this God is Krynn. Because no matter what it is, it was all brought by Krynn. Burden, you brought the original biological blood. I want the most accurate DNA data analysis to extract the serum. I can use it. At this time, Samuel was giving instructions to a deputy who was originally following him, using words that, although he looked calm, he could not hide the excitement in his heart. As long as this girl is used properly, she will never be inferior to the extremis virus and T-virus projects. At least for now, except for cloning the girl. He is also planning to try to extract the serum from the girl's body to see if he can make a super soldier serum based on it, so that all ordinary people can become true superpowers. If coupled with the immortality effect of the current T-virus series of medicines, then a truly immortal and super powerful race of emerging humans can truly be born. Continue. Then, after pausing the crazy brainstorming in his brain, Samuel continued to speak to everyone in the research room. This time, the girl's speed, intelligence, endurance, etc. were all tested. The result is very gratifying. The levels are divided into levels 1 to 7. Test subject: Jessica Jones. Age: 1-year-old Jean, 20 years old. Gender: female. Strength: level 4, snatch 1,888 kilograms, clean and jerk 2,440 kilograms, maximum striking force 4,891 kilogram. Speed level 3, normal running speed 112 kilometers h, 347 kilometers h in sprinting state. Jump leap level 3, leg strength, unaided running high jump 4 meters, standing long jump 7 meters. Endurance stamina level 4, able to maintain peak condition and continue high intensity exercise for 2 hours. Durability level 3, able to completely resist being hit on the head by a metal bat without any discomfort. Reflexes level 2, able to dodge multiple blows at close range. Self-healing level 3, able to heal gunshot wounds and knife wounds faster than ordinary people, significantly weaker than Tyrant and Extremis virus, able to be immune to almost all conventional bacteria, viruses, harmful substances and other diseases, including alcohol and drugs, which is intuitively reflected in the fact that he will not get infectious diseases and will not get drunk. Brain function mental processing level 2, completely within the normal human category, with no obvious outstanding points. After seeing this comprehensive data report in his hand, Samuel's face was unexpectedly happy. Although this girl does not have any intellectual talent, and can even be called mediocre, her physical abilities are definitely unique, and are even many times better than the existing security soldiers in the base. There are just some problems with fighting skills, but these are small things that can be learned and grown through acquired learning. In contrast, the girl's physical development is the top priority. Assemble a small team of security personnel, disarm and enter, order, subdue her. At this time, looking at the girl who was still in high spirits after such a long period of testing, Samuel immediately spoke to the staff beside him. Under the arrangement of the staff, a group of disarmed Black Watch members also walked in aggressively. After seeing the girl inside and confirming that she was their target this time, they started to straighten up, running towards the girl. But even so, a team of 6 people still moved towards the girl in an encircling formation, ensuring that they could support them at any time no matter when their teammates attacked. Not to mention that they have some top fighting masters. In the girl's eyes, all this seemed a bit out of control. Even after a few people entered the door and ran toward her, she finally reacted and tried to block them. However, after he blocked the elbow attack from the Black Watch soldier with his hand, the other party directly used the force to turn over, and appeared behind the girl back to back, and then used the lock technique to kill the girl. Lock it up. At this time, several Black Watch soldiers on the side also rushed over and prepared to hit the girl on the back of the head to subdue her. Although these responses were quick enough for the girl, she heard the woman say that as long as she knocked down these guys, she could eat. For the delicious food she had just eaten for the first time at noon, the girl just exerted slight pressure. The Black Watch soldier who had locked her suddenly felt like he was holding a huge hydraulic machine and was constantly testing the pressure on him. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.